Hey everyone, you're listening to the Engineering Politics Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking to Truman of Return to Reason about a bunch of things, including populism, the GameStop Wall Street controversy, the current state of the Republican Party and the right more generally, and what new exciting themes we might see in 2021. Although I think it's safe to say we are all happy that 2020 is over, but it isn't looking like 2021 is getting much better. I'm sorry to break it to you. I also want to take a quick moment to expand on something Truman and I talked about during this podcast, and that's the long break I, and really we, took between the election and now. Truman experienced much of what I did after the election. We were both confused by the results and rather predictable craziness that preceded it. I know for me it made it difficult to know when to restart my regular content, like the book reviews and my general writing and podcasting that didn't only cover the election news. It felt like I was just in a haze, lost in my own mind, not knowing when the right time to get back to business would be. And I apologize to those who listen and support this podcast and my content for the way too long break. I owe you more than that, and I'll make sure it won't happen again. So I hope this podcast will be a good start to the year. Like usual, these long-form discussions will have no bonus content at the end, but I would still appreciate you joining and subscribing to the Engineering Politics Locals community. You can go to engineeringpolitics.locals.com and become a member for free, or get the subscriber pass for as little as $2 per month. And you can use promo code EPFREE for a 3-month free trial of the subscription pass, that's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. I'll go over more where you can find me and support this content after the show. Also, make sure to show some support for Truman of Return to Reason. You can find Truman and join his locals community at returntoreason.locals.com. If you like the Engineering Politics Locals community, you will love the Return to Reason Locals community as well. So go check them out. All right, let's get this started. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast.
Hitting record now. All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Good to see you. Kevin and I are going to have a bit of a conversation here. Kevin of Engineering Politics, of course, which you should subscribe to and be a part of that community and so on and so forth. And we had something that we had talked about, I think, earlier this week, maybe 5 or 6 days ago, that we had actually talked about months and months ago doing something. And then right before we started here, it was like neither of us had actually prepared that, but we also both had thought of something else that we kind of wanted to I guess pick each other's brains about, and neither of us know what the other one had in mind really, which is kind of cool. But yeah, so that's what we're gonna do. It's just a little bit of a potpourri. If you ever watch the Celebrity Jeopardy, right? They have and there's always the potpourri category, at least on SNL version. I don't think I've ever watched the real version of Celebrity Jeopardy.
I think it's about the same.
Probably, yeah. But before we get started, I mean, Kevin, I guess we haven't really done anything since the election. So, you can spend as much or as little time on this question as you want. But how you doing, man? I just realized that probably nothing I said was very loud because I'm so far away from the mic. But how are you, man? What's going on? What's going on in Kevin land?
Yeah, I mean, like you said, we haven't really talked since the election. I haven't really done much since the election. Just kind of, hit a daze after that. And it was not as much of a surprise. Again, if I would have been, which I'm a betting man, I didn't place any bets on the election, but I would have probably bet on Biden as a much more realistic outcome. And that's what happened. You and I did a podcast on, not really predicting the results of the election, but we went over what the outcomes are going to be, what the political, societal outcomes are going to be. And, I think we both landed on there's going to be some violence, but there's going to be less if the left wins because the right tends to not be as violent. Obviously, with some events that happened recently, we found that there was some violence and things are, although this is an administration trying to bring everyone together, it doesn't seem like that's happening right now. So, that's where my head's been. It's kind of hard to figure out, all right, we have the holidays, Christmas and all that stuff, when do I restart my content? And that was really hard for me to kind of gauge when the appropriate time is and really when I'm in the appropriate headspace for it.
Yep.
So that, that's where I've been kind of just floating around, thinking about these things still, but not really knowing, when does my voice make sense for other people to listen to? When does my input actually matter? Because a lot of people were just like, I don't know I can't make heads or tails of what happened. There's possible, election fraud. And, I'm not one of those guys. I do believe Biden won this. I think there probably was fraud. I mean, there's fraud in every election. Was it enough to overturn it? I doubt it. But it's still, we knew this was going to happen. They just set it up for this to happen. And, only people trust in the election when their guy wins.
Yep.
And that's just not a good behavior to begin with. And, we're still, fighting it a little bit, but now, the next administration's here. We have a whole bunch of new things to talk about. And, that's me just kind of trying to figure out what do we go to next? What's the most important thing? What's my priorities for 2021? So that's kind of what I've been trying to figure out recently.
Nice. Yeah, that's good. Did you watch the, so I meant to post this in my locals and I never did. I meant to do a lot of things I never did. Probably a country song out there with that title. But so Uncommon Knowledge did a like end of the year thing with I think it was Kimberly Strassel, Douglas Murray, and one other dude. I can't remember who it is, some guy that writes for the Federalist. And they just talked about the election and the end of the year and just kind of process that a little bit. Have you seen that?
No, I haven't.
I've been meaning to post it. I'll post it. One thing they said in there that was really good was they said that basically since I forget which election it was, they said was the last election that this didn't happen, but it's been a while. They said that basically we haven't had an election where the losing side accepted the results. They gave one caveat, but essentially I think in the last 20 years is what they said. And I really liked this metaphor. They said, there are these stages of grief, that people work through and like, I forget what all the stages are. I know there's like anger, denial, like bargaining, all this other stuff. And the last one's all acceptance. And they said that the losing side used to work through those stages completely. And somewhere along the line, again, I forget which election it was. It might've been 2000, but I can't remember if that was it. When it started, they said that the losing side started working only all the way to the stage of bargaining. And bargaining is where you try to undo it, like make it not so. And they said, we haven't every side does this thing where they're just bargaining the whole time. And they haven't learned how to work through to like acceptance and moving on and growing from the loss. And that's one of the reasons they said we become so polarized and why things have become so cutthroat is because whoever loses, they always just end up in that bargaining stage. I mean, that's what the best example, is the last 4 years of the media and everything, just trying to everyone bargaining, like to undo, Trump's presidency. And then the same thing in the wake of this election on the right, the bargaining, the Supreme Court will do it, and watching these press conferences where they're talking about, Dominion voting software, which I never got hung up on the Dominion stuff. I don't think that was necessary to, I think it was actually probably more of a distraction than anything, but it doesn't matter. But the point is that like, I thought that was a really good way of phrasing it. And that like, there's a lot of ways to conceptualize, what's wrong right now. It's like throw a rock in any direction, and you're going to find something substantially wrong with society, at least in the US, it's worth talking about. But, that way of looking at it of like, okay, one way that we could, hopefully get back to a place of some kind of, not this level of animosity, and, zero sum politics would be for, the losing side to like in anything, for the losers to stop getting hung up on bargaining and moving to acceptance. Because acceptance, I've had this thought in my mind, lately about just the concept of humility and the role it plays in leadership and the role it plays in society or any society that functions well, from a small scale, like in a family, all the way up to like your entire country. And, humility is one of the things that's necessary to learn and to grow from mistakes and from failures, and to, have that self-awareness and course correct where necessary. And so I think that kind of ties nicely into that of, we need to get to a place where we have the humility on either side. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are, to accept, failures and mistakes and learn and grow from them. Otherwise, we'll just keep doubling down on mistakes and keep doubling down on the animosity and the division. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I really would be very interested to see that video, because there's not enough Douglas Murray on the internet. I think there should be more, but it's like a small, I don't know what the caveat is, but I don't remember that happening during the Obama elections. Maybe I'm still in the denial stage. I don't know, but other than he was born in Kenya kind of thing, I don't really think there was much of a pushback on his election, but I certainly understand where you're coming from. And to me, it's like the stages of grief. It's kind of like I don't even remember what generation we're in technically, but it's kind of like a millennial thing. It's like, don't push me through the stages of grief. Like, let me take my time, and this resistance to actually moving toward acceptance or moving toward accountability. It's such a millennial thing to just stop at bargaining. Like, when you say that and not following all the way through, it just seems like something that, our generation is just adapted to, because it's a way to remove accountability. I mean, accountability is like the poison pill in politics now. Yep. And I think to get past the stage of bargaining where you can still push off accountability, that's the hurdle that they just can't quite get over, or we can't. I mean, I'm not going to say it's the politicians, it's us, the people, the voters. A lot of us are unwilling to move past that. And so that's an interesting way to put it. And I think it's super accurate. I mean, yep. It seems like everything's always going to be contested, and just the conditions set up beforehand. Like, it was special this time just because the conditions were set up ahead of time. We all knew it. We all called it out. It's like, okay, just so you know, even though, yes, mail-in voting ideally would be great so people are less likely to COVID, you're setting up this thing for failure. Yep. I mean, you're giving all the excuses to whichever side loses, because I don't really know how different it would have been if Trump would have won and what the left would have been doing. They'd be going to court, yeah. They'd be doing these things. Yeah. And to just deny it. Deny that as a possibility, I think, is a little bit silly. So I think it's certainly a problem on both sides, and it'll be interesting, how we move forward from this. If it's just going to be Biden brings home all of the people to make sure we all come together and we're unified, or is it going to be what it actually looks like now, that we're just going to be divided, and the media is just going to be like, oh, we're all unified. It's just you awful people in the middle of the country that are creating this division.
Totally. And that segues really nicely into one of the things I wanted to talk to you about and pick your brain about. Exactly what you just said about how, the media is unified. Everything is normal according to them. I don't know if you saw the thing I posted on Ruben's thing where MSNBC ran this video segment that was Biden's first full week stuns a weary nation with its normalcy. And people appropriately pointed out, okay, well, what's normal about erecting permanent fences around the White House, 30 plus executive orders, impeaching the former president, for the second time. And basically Washington, D.C. is, I don't know if it's still in this place, but it was almost in a martial law. I mean, they had a curfew and everything. That might have died down since. I don't think it has. I mean, there's still a huge National Guard troop presence there. Last I heard, at least, I think it was, again, the Hill. I think Sager was talking about it. But that was a few days ago. Maybe that's changed. But the point is, it kind of speaks to what I brought up. It might've been in that conversation with Carlin or whenever me, you, her, and James were talking, but that, the media, it's normal because they said so. And it was chaos because they said so. I mean, that's the contrast, right? They can gin up a atmosphere of chaos, and then they can just force normalcy down your throat. No, it's normal. This is all normal. Everything's normal. Everything's good, great, normal, beautiful. And there's a real problem there. And to your point of what you said about how, they want to declare everything normal except for, and unify except for, those people in the middle of the country. There's I've been paying attention to the amount of clickbaity rhetoric on mainstream media sites seems to have skyrocketed since the election. And I'm really thinking it's because people aren't tuning in. So even the headlines now are, that's why MSNBC, that no respectable journalist should run a segment like that. Right. Brian Stelter had that thing where it was, the press secretary promises to tell the truth, in parentheses, how refreshing. That's it's just, they're just, pooping their opinions out nonstop. And
he's a reliable source, though.
He is a reliable source, and it's true. But that's where it is. It's become this clickbaity thing. And, CNN has been running a lot of stuff about the poison, that's left in the United States, and using a lot of this charged rhetoric, but they're mostly referring to anyone that supported Trump or that, someone like Ted Cruz, for example. The AOC, I don't know if you saw this, but Ted Cruz was trying to unify with her and find some common ground about the GameStop stuff. And she was like, well, you basically tried to have me killed. And it's like, what kind of crazy, that is the most unhinged response possible. But it speaks to the general theme of things right now, which is, we want to move past everything Trump as quickly as possible. And to what I said earlier, not learn from it, double down on the hubris that got him there. So the thing I wanted to pick your brain about is you've mentioned this in as part of other things that we've talked about before, but I've never really heard you flush out. And I'd be interested to know, basically you seem to have a great deal of reticence around the notion of populism in, political movements. And I just wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit, because it seems to me that it's not going anywhere. And two, there's a degree in which, and we should probably make sure we define our terms here. But there's a degree in which I am seeing it as necessary for us to, actually get back to a functioning system, to be honest. And so, populism is basically, at least the working definition that I use is a political movement that attempts to reach out to ordinary people, and is more interested in what is the plight of everyday citizens, and at least in its rhetoric, defines itself as something that is not about the establishment, but more about average people. Obviously, there's a lot of ways in which that can go wrong, but that definition is, what populism basically describes. And so I've heard you express some concern about it. And so I just wanted to kind of pick your brain about it and maybe argue a little bit about that. So the way that ties into what we talked about just a second ago, there is this idea of let's unify, we're back to normalcy, right? As long as we get rid of those, pesky people in the middle of the country, or the new Latin American voters, or Hispanic American voters, or whatever that
they're not Hispanic.
Yeah.
That counts skin color, heritage, and voting history. That's what dictates Hispanic heritage. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And so, they're white now. They call them, it's white,
Mm-hmm.
Or I think in the, there's a segment of the black population that says skin folk, but not kin folk, if you don't vote my way. But that seems really dangerous to me, to do that. And so, yeah, just go whatever direction you want, then we can kind of get into it. But
Yeah. Well, first I'm going to start out. I don't know what ability you were born with, but you got to get out of my head because I was going to sit down and write a piece about populism today. So it's interesting you brought that up because I have gotten a lot of pushback. I've been on some videos, on some calls, the Carlin call, which I really enjoy. I really like the people on there, but a lot of them are, talking about populism, and I chipped in and they're like, well, there's dangers in populism, just so you know, and I left it there. I didn't really want to engage in the conversation yet. And then I had to leave to drop my daughter off at school. And then I saw a whole bunch of stuff coming through the chats, like going against what I said. I didn't have time to read them. Again, I bet they were respectful because they're good people. But yeah, I'm certainly against the grain in this respect. But before I move on, can we agree that an antonym to populism would be elitism, right? Kind of on the other end of that scale, on the other end of that spectrum. Does that make sense?
I would disagree with that, and here's why. So elitism, and so maybe this is where, again, definitions matter. We might be using the same word different ways. But whenever I think of elitism, I think of elitism as we are the elites, we are the ascendant majority, right? We are the ascent, not majority, but we are the ascendant ones. We are it's elitism naturally strikes a tone of we are better than the non-elite. And I don't see populism as saying that the normal people are better than the elites. I see it as saying the normal people are traditionally ignored more, and get less attention than the elites. So it seems more as a way of saying, let's not ignore those people, not they're better than the elites. I don't see it as being that. So I don't think they're the exact same, because elitism is more about like a hierarchy of better than or greater than, less than. And populism to me seems more about like, no, it's just we need to pay attention to everyone, including like normal people. So I don't see it as creating that hierarchy. Now, some people might see it that way. I don't see it that way.
So the way I see this, I see it as a spectrum, much like nationalism and globalism. I've talked about that before, where you can have nationalist policy that's just 100% for the nation, and if something bad happens to another country, that's okay. If that's the extreme nationalism, extreme globalism is the exact opposite. We worry about the people of the world, and if something bad happens to our country in the meantime, so be it. I see populism and elitism kind of lying on that spectrum. And what you defined right there, if you're going to define your brand of populism as, I care about the everyday person, and we can't just basically, it's the opposite of elitism that, I don't, the elites are just people too. And we ought not to just treat them as, our leaders effectively. I would place that more toward the middle of that spectrum. I think extreme populism, which is what people believe in, is that they are better than the elites. This is where you get Bernie Sanders populism, right? Like eat the rich. That is populism. That is absolutely on the populism scale. It's, I think, more to a more radical end. Elitism, again, to the radical end. I'm elite. I'm better than you. But I think there is elitism where you can say, I'm very successful. That's what kind of puts me in the elite category. And I think I can help teach some things to some people, but I don't necessarily believe I'm better than everyone else.
So the question is, then, should we be, it does, but should we be engaging in the, like, when we're discussing this stuff, should, like, this might be a different question, but there's basically a few different options there then whenever we're talking about it. We can either automatically assume that we're going to use it and we're only describing the most pathological version of it. Or we can use it and say, and by the way, this is what I'm talking about, and just define it well and say, I'm not talking about this version. It's the same way like with nationalism or immigration stuff. Like there's a way to talk about it. If someone says, yeah, I'm pro immigration enforcement.
So is it fair to say that your position is not always static? I think that, because that was my kind of follow-up question, if you're going to, the same thing with nationalism, I think I'm more nationalist on some things and more moderate on other things. right? So my position isn't necessarily static. I can move around in that spectrum depending on the topic at hand. And I
Sure.
think you can do the same thing with populism versus, again, if I put it on this scale, I think there's ways you can move around because if I can get to kind
Can you
of,
give an example of that? Yeah, because I wouldn't see that, because I see it more as like a principle of like you should try to appeal to everyone. You should not ignore the
yeah,
problems of everyday people. I can't see anywhere
yeah,
that I would fluctuate on that.
yeah. I mean, so I actually had this idea as I write this down, and then Michael Knowles actually had an episode that he goes over almost the exact same thing. So I feel like I'm just copying from him now. But I'm a populist when the elites have too much. I'm a populist when it comes to all the power that the big tech oligarchs have. I think they need to be put down a peg and understand that they're just people too. I think some of these guys just don't believe in that. They think that like elitism is when you have an idea and you think everyone should follow that idea, even if you think that idea is going to help everyone. If someone has an idea opposite of yours, that means that they're bad. I think we see that elitism in politics all the time,
Sure.
where you know, I mean, the way like Knowles kind of explained it is like, I'm a populist when the people are right and our elites are corrupt. I'm an elitist when the elites are, we have a healthy elite class that are actually doing good things, and you have, again, Bernie Sanders is a good example of this. He uses populism in an extreme radical way that is not a good thing. I mean, to me, populism fits sort of in, you know, your true democracy versus a republic, or you could even say a dictatorship if you put those two on a scale. True democracy, I mean, that's absolute populism because the people,
Mob
the
rule.
everyday people are going to be able to, mob rule, and there's danger in that. Obviously, you can characterize the Nazi Party, that was a nationalist populist movement. I think they used populism to its advantage to get into power and then screwed a bunch of people over, right? So that's kind of why I shy away against I would never consider myself a populist, even though I may be more populist depending on, again, the health of the elite or the health of the general population. If the general population says, give me money because they see the government handing out a bunch of money, no, that's wrong. You shouldn't do that. You got to resist against that, even if most
Was
people think it's the right thing.
was the Revolutionary War a populist movement?
Yeah. I mean, I haven't done much studying up on the Revolutionary War, but yeah, most of the people wanted, I guess it would be a populist movement.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think
rise
so
up
too.
against, England, yeah.
And it was no taxation without representation.
Mm-hmm.
The average people here are being represented, but we're being taxed. So I guess my point is that, like, there are certain things that I think you could say the default way we'll discuss it is going to be in the context of, it's like, okay, let's put it this way. The way a thing naturally plays out, or the way a thing seems to historically play out, is probably the way you should discuss it. So whenever I talk about socialism, I don't ever give caveats. Like, I'm talking about the bad kind, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just baked into the conversation. So maybe the question is, and I don't know the answer, but the question is, whenever we talk about populism, should the default be the pathological kind and talk about it the same way we talk about socialism, where you don't add caveats to it, you just assume that we're talking about a negative thing, or that it's, there's a way to talk about it that gives the devil his due and is like, populism, and here's the caveat. I'm not talking about mob rule or, reverse elitism, saying we are ascendant, and the elites are bad, but just talking about like how dangerous it is to ignore, and now in our current milieu, to like denigrate and in a lot of ways threaten average everyday people. There's got to be a way to discuss that. And if populism isn't the word, fine, but there needs to be a way to talk about the necessity of that, is I guess my point. And so that's why I wanted to pick your brain about it, because we are increasingly in a powder keg of more and more people getting swept aside, and their problems are either ignored or they're given really awful answers to their problems. I was listening. So you said we need more Douglas Murray in the world. Him and Jordan Peterson did an interview like a week ago, maybe, that I was watching, and it was pretty good. And, Jordan Peterson, he said a line in there that was good. I'm probably going to put it in this thing I'm writing. He said, the only problem worse than inequality are the solutions given to inequality. And, he's not wrong. And so I guess my point is that we have to come up with a way to address, what populism, at least the way I'm describing it, addresses and takes it seriously. And again, if that's not the word, that's fine. But it seems like we kind of have to do that. And if we don't, it's like things are going to continue to get worse and worse and worse as more and more people, stew in their legitimate frustrations and, the subsequent frustrations of the fact that they're either being ignored or that the solutions they're being given don't really work. So anyway, you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, the way I would say it, and it's not like I'm against using the word populism. I think a populist movement can be good. I think you and I would both agree that Donald Trump, he brought upon us a populist movement. That he was a good, even though he's an elite himself.
Yep.
He went into politics saying, "Hey, there's a whole bunch of people here that you ignore. Not only ignore, you hate. You actively hate these people."
Yep.
And it's so he did a great thing. So there's populist movements that are fine. I just caution people to not follow someone who's going to label themselves as a populist politician, because that will get taken too far. It's the same thing we see over and over and over again, is when you fight for a cause, you get elected because of that cause. You put all the things in place to make sure whatever people were oppressed by are no longer oppressed, but then you need to manufacture oppression to maintain power, right? So if you build a movement on populism, let's say things actually get better. Most of the populist movements are just leave me alone, not make my life better, right? at least from the right wing. From the left wing, again, use Bernie Sanders, who I think is absolutely a populist and the kind you want to stay away from.
Totally. Yeah.
Is someone who's going to keep promising you a better and better life, even though they went into whatever office they went into and solved that problem. If they want to stay in office, they got to manufacture a new problem, right? And that's the problem with populism, is you will manufacture oppression for the people to say, you're still oppressed, keep me in office, even though you're not. And then you're going to start to actively fight against your cause effectively.
Well, what you're saying assumes that the problems that would be addressed are like easily solvable or easily addressed. So let's take, let's just take two different things. Let's take healthcare and higher education, and just the mess of issues, across the board.
We can blow those. We can blow through those two topics in like 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so, the point is that like, I do not think that if someone was elected, let's say hypothetically, to address those issues, and how they are impacting average people, that they're going to get that solved, real fast. So in other words, I guess my point is, depending on the problem, like, okay, Social Security, or something, pick one. We have a lot of deeply entrenched issues in this country. Depending on the problem, the idea that they would just solve it, as opposed to gradually at least make it a little bit less awful, and chip away at it. I think that's a much more likely scenario given, the reality of the issues we have, than them just breezing through it, as you said, and then having to manufacture something.
I mean, I had to use that example kind of in a short-term meantime, and a good example that actually is technically a form of elitism is racial oppression, right? That narrative is around today not because there's a vast amount of oppressed races in America. It's just, again, objectively, it's not true, but they're manufacturing the oppression to maintain power. And in reality, that's not populism, that's elitism, because no one really believes in them. They're just kind of the elites saying you're too stupid. If you don't understand this, you're too stupid.
Yep.
So let me think for you. That's effectively their movement. So that's an example of elitists doing that. But I think populists can do the same thing. It's them saying, the people on Wall Street are acting awful and we should, take them down. And then you take them down and it's like, well, they're going to manufacture some sort of a new boogeyman for you and say, oh, we've got to take that guy down. And really it just becomes a tool to maintain power, right? So that is the danger within populism. I'm not saying we must not use the term at all. I would just say I would never consider myself a populist the same way I wouldn't consider myself an elitist. You got to give me a situation. I somewhat consider myself a nationalist, I guess, because I am more pro-America than I'm pro-China, but still I believe there is nationalist policy and there's more globalist policy, and that's fine. There's nuance there. But just labeling yourself as a populist movement, there's a ton of danger in there. And it's just kind of the slippery slope argument, I guess. When you say, okay, I'm going to make a coalition of people that are, fighting for the oppressed, once we get past that hurdle, it makes sense to me to maintain my power by saying they're still oppressed in some way. I'll just find a new target. And again, you see that a lot with people like Bernie Sanders.
Does it? So again, I'm just thinking through this. Is there a chance that the framework that you're putting on there, I'm trying to figure out if it's avoidable. So whenever you just said trying to create a coalition of the oppressed, that might be our current moment. That might be the lens that's used to view everything, conflict theory. But is there a way in which, we can say people can have legitimate grievances and not see themselves as victims or oppressed, but it's just like, hey, this is a real problem. And so is there a way in which like we only see that danger because of like kind of right now how everything is through that lens, as opposed to like, no, this is a real problem. Like, could you have a coalition of people that are pissed and have a legitimate grievance without it being like this, worship of victimhood or something? Like, in other words, is that something inherent to populism? Is it avoidable in this moment or not? Are we seeing it that way? Because I understand what you're saying.
Mm-hmm.
Do we see it that way because of the right now and the way everything is, or is that inherent to it? Like, could you express legitimate grievances and represent people with legitimate grievances without it breaking down into this low res oppressor-oppressed dichotomy?
Yeah, of course you can. I think you'd absolutely, present yourself for the working people. But, we see a good example in like unions. They fight for the working people and then they gain a lot of power and then they fight for the union. There's a certain point at which the union stops fighting for the people in it and starts to fight for the union itself.
Right, but that's that corrupt hierarchy thing we've talked about. I mean, I guess I'm trying to tease out whether or not our default position of talking about things should be their slippery slope, most pathological conclusion, or should be like rooted in like the principle of it, I suppose.
Yeah.
So an example, talk about anything without inferring that we're talking about the most pathological version of it, unless, of course, the pathological version is its natural endpoint. Like the pathological version of socialism is just socialism after it's been around a while.
Yeah. So I think a good example of this, and I want to say it before I forget my train of thought because I haven't written it down, but is more like of the right wing, right? I as a conservative, want government to stay out of my life. They're in my life too much.
Yep.
And if I can ground that belief into founding principle, understanding why I ought to be able to govern myself, because it's actually better for everyone around me if we're able to have that liberty. Then, once I get that less resistance from the government, I can, I'm going to be like, awesome, let's maintain this liberty. There's also a point in which you say, I want these people out of my lives because they're the government, they're slime. We don't want them, keep them out of our lives. Once they're out of your life, that turns to, all right, now we want these people to give us stuff. right? That it changes from I want more freedom to we're going to keep going in this direction. You see prosperity because you're allowed to do things yourself. Now you want more protection from the government. Now you want more security. Now you want them to grant you things just like the left does now. I think that's a really good, I think that's extremely possible if you just go on a populist movement. We're not grounding it in founding principle. Does
Sure.
that make sense? So
Totally,
when
it
you
does.
ground it and you like understand why we ought to do these things rather than let's just do these things because a guy who's really really convincing tells us we should, I think there's your difference, right? If you're actually educating the people as to the ought instead of just the is, I think that is the point at which you're like, okay, I'm fighting for maybe a populist movement, but I'm not a populist candidate. Like I'm not going to be just fighting for only you and not, very, again, elite, depending on how you define it. I think you and I can agree that by any objective measure, Ben Shapiro is an elite, right?
Totally.
But I think you and I may disagree as to does he stand up for more elitism or does he stand up for more, the regular everyday person?
I think he stands up for elitism, but that's
yeah.
Okay. I don't. But
and I think
also
you
don't
and I
think
are
it's
an
on
opposite
purpose.
on that, but that's fine. It's just even if you're an elite person, doesn't necessarily mean you're an elitist. You can still fight for
Totally.
the. I mean, again,
No, like I
Donald
said,
Trump's a
I
good
don't think it's
example
on
of that,
purpose. I don't think it's on purpose with Ben. I think that he
Yeah.
just has a better way to put it is that I think he has tremendous blind spots when it comes to normal people,
And I can
and
agree with
that's
that.
obvious in the content he makes. So I don't attribute it to malice at all. I just attribute it to
And most of
just
these
his
things,
perspective. That's all.
and again, I think you could be a populist candidate who takes things too far into a dangerous territory and have no malicious whatsoever. As most, again, Bernie Sanders, I don't think is a malicious person. I just think he's a true believer, and there's nothing that's going to stop that. And a lot of awful, awful things could happen because of it. I mean, like I told you, off camera, it's just there's not a lot of Bond villains in the world. Not a lot of people are evil just to be evil. They believe they're fighting the right cause. There's some people who have lost the thread. I think Pelosi fits that category, who's just like, I'm just going to do whatever I can to hold power. And but I don't think you see it really as many of those as you're going to see people who are just fighting the good fight. The AOCs who just believes she wants to bring equality, which is great for her. So do I, but I just don't want to force it via the government gun.
Yeah, Sam Harris calls that the banality of evil. That it's incredibly rare. You're more likely to come across people that are just through their either action or inaction are creating evil outcomes, that is not part of their intention. They're just doing it. It's just happening, as a byproduct.
And funny you bring up Sam too, because I was listening to his podcast when I was driving around today, and he's having a conversation with a guy who's talking about revolutions, and he's got the elitist mentality. He would never admit that, but he's like, oh, we need to do these things. They're talking about income tax. Like we shouldn't have states who have no income tax and states that do, because that incentivizes people to move out of California and move to Texas or Florida because they have no income tax, and that's selfish. Like, is that not an elitist position right there? That we ought not to have these individual rights or states' rights just because it's unfair to California because they're losing people, right? So there is that elitist mentality that Sam certainly has. I mean, I like Sam Harris for a lot of things. I don't necessarily agree with him on a whole bunch, but I do like the way he thinks. But he's an elitist, like through and through.
He's thinking, I like the way he thinks. He hasn't done a whole lot of that lately.
Yeah. He definitely has the Trump derangement syndrome. But it's still good to hear from people like that, even though you don't agree with them, because you understand again the functioning, and Sam Harris is not an evil person. But there's a lot of things that he's all for that I think would end up with very, very evil results, right? And I think populism, again, to my point, I think goes the same direction.
So then here's my question: how do we? Because I am increasingly like I would say that if you were to dig down into what I see as the core of like a lot of the concerns that I have right now, and what I think is driving so much of the social unrest that I think is only going to get worse, is the fact that legitimate grievances are being ignored or they're being distorted. So here, let's take an example. All right. So we can give one from the left and one from the right. So a grievance on the left might be there are legitimate inequalities between the averages of let's say like wealth, which is a poor measurement, family income, which is a poor measurement, and so on, or incarceration rates, which, you can get into, well, did you commit a crime or not? But so I'm not getting into the why, but there are legitimate observable grievances about like inner city Black America. And again, I'm not, we would, if we were to get into why a lot of those things occur, I think we would agree 100% on it. Mm-hmm. But the way those grievances are being addressed, at least by the loudest voices, is like distorting it, so then you get into systemic racism that has to be rooted out, and ACAB and cop, you have to have the talk because all cops are going to try and kill you, right, and stuff like that.
And so, again, you have to ground everything. I don't mean to derail this at all, fine, but I want to make sure I get to this before I forget. Like any argument, there has to be truth in there in order for it to be compelling to anyone. You take inner city issues, especially with crime and poverty. They blame racism, for their woes. They're actually right. Racism is the problem for them. They just are blaming the wrong people.
It's a different kind of racism.
Exactly. Yeah. It's the what right. I mean, some people call it reverse racism. It's not reverse racism. It's just racism. Yeah. And again, the low
expectations kind of
right.
thing.
Well, and it's like, okay, you're basically children. Let me help you from the hand of the government, and that is racism. Like you're prejudging them based on the skin color, and that's wrong. And so they have the threat. They understand that it's racism. It's just it's being packaged and branded in a certain way. That same thing is the big switch between Republicans, Democrats. It's packaged the same way and it's sold the same way, and that's the problem.
Totally. And so it's my point is that like there are legitimate grievances there because they can look at like, okay, here's the numbers. Now they don't look at other numbers like single motherhood rates and those kinds of things. But is it a true statement to say inner city schools suck? They're underfunded. Dropout rates are higher. College dropout rates are higher in the Black community. Yes. And like those are true statements, but they just don't, the only answers being given are these distorted, insane answers. And so there's one example on the left that the left speaks to. So on the right, you could say, whether it's something about working class America that has a lot of those same issues, or, with, blue collar jobs disappearing, that we can talk about why that is and, whether or not they'll come back and so on and so forth. Or even let's go a little bit more controversial. People on the right who say, okay, something was screwy about the election. And we would just like to have that heard, whenever in that Sam Harris and Jordan Peterson conversation, or it's not Sam Harris, sorry, Douglas Murray, Murray said, well, look at all the court cases that were, thrown out. None of them got heard. And, even those two really well-informed people, are operating under really flimsy information where it's like a lot of those cases weren't filed by the Trump administration. And a lot of them, they refused to even hear them. They didn't
on procedural grounds, they rejected it.
Yeah, it was exactly. And so it wasn't about the merits of the case at all. They didn't even hear it. And that's not to say, that was what the two dissenting opinions in the Supreme Court, they said, look, just because we're dissenting doesn't mean that we would agree, but we still should have heard the arguments. And so, but at all levels, you're seeing, and all over the place, you're seeing that kind of idea of, well, there was no evidence and even the courts didn't hear it. And to allege some vast conspiracy that includes, this is what Murray and Peterson talked about. Like you're alleging a conspiracy that goes all the way to Mike Pence and the Supreme Court and everything, and saying that the only sane person is Donald Trump. And, maybe some people would say that, but others, and I would put myself in this category, would say none of it was ever even heard. And so like, we don't know. It might've been bad arguments. We don't know. Because they weren't, in a lot of cases, weren't tossed out on their merits. It was, like you said, procedural, or they just didn't want to touch it. which I think is fair. I understand the idea of like, so there was that article whenever Tara Reid came out with the allegations against Joe Biden, and the dude, there was a whole bunch of these articles, but one guy said, I don't want an investigation because I'm afraid they'll find something, and I don't want that to happen. I could see judges, saying, I don't want to hear this because I'm afraid I'll hear something compelling, and now I'm in a position where my life is legitimately in danger if I.
That's what happens.
Yeah. And
right.
So, that whether it's, again, those cases might have been bogus. I'm sure most of them were, but the point is that it's safe to say that there were legitimate grievances that were ignored and are being like everywhere in establishment media are being strawmanned. And on the left, it's a similar thing where there are legitimate grievances that aren't being ignored, but they're given like distorted, solutions that aren't actually going to fix the problem. And so all I'm saying is that the amount of people in the population that are frustrated for good reason and have legitimate grievances, again, I mean, go left and right, look at higher ed, and our continually ballooning student loan bubble, and what the monster that's turning into. There has to be a way to talk about those things and address them, where it's, because right now the two options are, there are people who are ignoring the problem, and there are people that are giving insane non-solutions that will only make it worse. This, like, I guess ad hocery, I think is what it's called, where it's just temporary nonsense. And that's why I was asking you about the populism thing, because if we don't have a way to legitimately talk about that, those issues in a way that's honest and has that humility I mentioned at the beginning, to where it's like, no, there are legitimate grievances here. I'll give one just personally. So, like I said, I used in 2016, I was a Bernie Sanders, supporter, and a big thing for me was the student loan issue. And like, obviously now, like, I'm like, okay, you can't just forgive that debt, and you don't want to make college free. Also, it's not free. All of those answers that the left has are bad. They're bad answers. They're not answers. They will make things worse significantly. But is it true that I have a lot of student loan debt? Yeah, it is. Is that unique to me? No. That student loan debt, I mean, we ran into this issue this summer where we were trying to get a loan to buy a house, and we could not, the only loans we could even get approved for were like 11, 13%. They were insane. And the literally the main issue for every single one of them was the student loan debt. And it didn't matter that, like, I make income-based payments. I always have. And so, like, it wouldn't have been an issue for us paying our mortgage. There was a lot of cases where it would have been, if they like looked at what the actual like debt to income ratio was, the mortgage would have been the same or cheaper than our rent. But they had to use this equation that was, we assume that you're paying this much every month on your loans. And it's like, I don't pay anywhere near that, but that's what they have to do. And so it kept us from being able to get a house. There's a couple different houses that we wanted to get, that we were looking at, that would have been great for us. And so I guess my point is, and I'm not making that like about me or anything like that, but there's a lot of people in that boat. If you look at the data on how many people, millennials especially, cite student loans as the main thing that's kept them from getting a house, which has long been a big part of, in America, like getting property, having a home, and being able to build up some equity. That's been a big part of it. And that this generation, our generation, has been shut out of that by the student loan issue. And I'm not like mad at any particular thing. I took those loans out, so I don't see it like myself as a victim necessarily, but it's still a problem, is my point. And so, like, that's just one example. that is going to continue to grow, whether it's the race thing or the blue collar stuff or the election thing, the amount of people every year that have legitimate grievances that aren't being addressed or not being addressed in a serious way is going to continue to grow. Just statistically, if you look at, like, let's say college stays the same, which is bad. It's not bad. Let's say that we don't get more graduates, whatever.
If the American university, the way we see it now, does not die or cease to exist within the next decade, we're going to be in really bad shape.
It'll destroy us. I think quite literally.
Because we already have the solution. Honestly, the solution is YouTube. Like, I've learned significantly more. And I went to like engineering school, like a proper engineering school. And I've learned more on YouTube than anything else. Because it's not necessarily YouTube. It's just like I'm willing. Like, I had to learn how to learn more so than learn in college, right? And if I want, I'm actually curious about something, I'll just go out and try to figure it out myself, as opposed to sitting in class. But I mean, that's the easy thing to correct. The hard thing to correct is what you're talking about with student loan. And I'm in student loan debt too. So I get what you mean there. And when it comes to, I'm not saying to ignore this real problem we have. And even like, what I would consider a bad populist like Bernie Sanders, he builds it on very legitimate grievances, right? It's just, we have different solutions. Very often, we understand the problems, solutions are mirror opposite, where he thinks you just get rid of it. And I think that you stop giving out federal or government guaranteed loans, and you see these guys, lower their tuition significantly, and they'd stop building their own administrative departments in their universities. But it's not to say that these grievances aren't legitimate. And I understand what you're getting into. If you have someone like me, which this is a very common talking point with a lot of the squishy Republican types, right? Like, I reject populism. It's just all awful. But they do the same thing like nationalism. Like, I don't want to be labeled a nationalist, mostly because the media will smear me, and I don't want to deal with that, right? I'm not in a way that, populism is all bad. I would just always caution people to ever go with just a populist candidate who just seems like they're just doing it to gain power more so than just actually to help people. And even if they really want to help people, everything can go too far. Mm-hmm. And if you want to put a very, fine note on the problem, the imbalance between what I would say the general population and the elites, I think like hashtag learn to code is a good example of that. The elites shot it out to people, the coal workers and all the people whose industries were going under, and that's fine. Then the normal everyday people did it to all these journalists getting laid off, and they're geting banned on Twitter. That asymmetry is where you can clearly see the problem, again, how I'd say more populist versus the more elites. And so there's definitely an imbalance. And again, to say I would, on what I would consider the spectrum of populism to elitism, I probably lean more on the populist side more often. But again, I'm not static. It depends on the topic at hand, I would say. So sorry, I didn't mean to derail what you're saying.
No, you didn't. I mean, I think you get the gist of what I'm saying. Yeah. So I'll word the problem. Then here's the question. The higher the number of legitimately pissed off people in the population, of that population, you have a percentage of people that are capable of being radicalized, right? So the more people you have, the larger the group of people that are capable of being radicalized. And I see the number is getting bigger. Like, if you were to, let's say, do some type of polling data on people who like see big issues or have if you were to, I guess, get granular on these things, I would imagine that the amount of people that have these legitimate frustrations are going to go up every single year and have been for a while. And so I really worry about, kind of like what I talked about with the, on the right specifically, the danger of someone coming that taps into that frustration in a pathological way. We see it on the left already. I mean, that's what a lot of the BLM, Antifa, people who, Bernie or AOC, supporter type people, they buy into the bad answers to their legitimate grievances. And so, I worry about that happening on the right as a counterforce. And I worry about something that unites the two. That GameStop was, a thing that united the left and the right in a lot of ways, because, every normal person on the left and right is like, yeah, F the hedge fund guys. So I think that my fear is that if we don't address these issues that are very deeply embedded in our system and in our national narratives, if we don't address them in a serious way, like, I think it has to be like the main focus of whatever the next political movement is. I think it has to be, because if it isn't, and when I say, let me be specific, it already is the focus of a very large political movement, but in a pathological way. Cancel student loan debt, defund the police, reparations, a $15 minimum wage, make college tuition free, all of those things. That's a very large political movement and coalition on the left. It already exists. And it's only going to grow because the amount of people pissed off and who for those issues are essential to their lives is going to grow. And so if we don't have like a movement that seriously answers those issues and seriously addresses them as its central focus, the pathological answer is what's going to gain ascendancy. I truly believe that. And its answers are burn the whole thing down, or implement a bunch of policies that will result in the whole thing burning down. But either way, the whole thing burns if that's what wins. And so we need to have something that addresses that. So I don't know how to do that, and that's why I asked about populism at the beginning. But my fear is that if we don't, then we're screwed. That's what's going to destroy us. If we don't have something on, I don't care if it's right or left, but some political movement that takes those issues seriously.
I think it's interesting you say that. I had a back and forth on Facebook with a group I'm in that's like an NFL based group. So we talk about football and they're talking about trades, and one of them was, I want to trade this guy to get a really top round pick. But I mean, if to not get too far in the weeds, they want to trade Watson from the Texans to the Jacksonville Jaguars for the first overall pick. And I'm like, yeah, you take that 100% because both teams win. And I got just kicked in the teeth by a bunch of Jaguars fans because they're like, why would we help out the Texans? And I'm like, I get that. Like, I understand that. I don't want the Green Bay Packers trading with the Bears because I don't want the Bears to take advantage at all. But I kept poking and prodding with them. I'm like, okay, every trade ideally advantages both sides. This happens to be in division. It's like what you want is the best quarterback, the best team that can beat any team. Doesn't matter how good the other team is. Like, you're going to face them anyways. Like, you got to beat the best teams. You're going to win the Super Bowl unless you just wanted to win the division. And like the final responses I got, the final FUs were like, I'd rather see the Texans go down than make the playoffs. And I'm like, this is indicative of our culture, isn't it? I'd rather see because I actually do disagree with the whole GameStop thing. I actually don't think it was a very good thing. And I was going to write something on it, but then Ben Shapiro did a episode that was basically exactly what I was about to say. And I'm like, no, I'm just not going to do it. But we have a culture that would rather see the successful go down than the unsuccessful become successful, right? I think that's a fair way to characterize why Bernie Sanders is so popular and why socialism is back on the rise, because that's all socialism is. It's envy, and that's all it is. It's based on and
envy and resentment, I think.
Right. And like when it comes to the hedge fund guys, it's like, well, I understand there's some bad hedge fund managers, just as there's bad engineers, there's bad police, there's bad everything. And, we see movies made about a lot of these bad guys, but most of them I'd say are good and they're serving a purpose. And to take them down just cause, like, I think it was a good check to remind them that you can't just short anything you want and expect to make a bunch of money, because it will end up losing money on this, but they won't end up losing everything. They'll take a hit and they'll recover. The people who are going to be holding all the losses are going to be the everyday people who end up buying the stock at an extraordinarily high price, and then it's just demolishes the stock price. It goes from whatever 400 back down to $6. It's going to be the everyday person, because the hedge fund managers is going to short the stock again. Like, they're going to come out with a loss, but they'll be okay. And what's going to end up happening with this whole thing is a bunch of everyday people who just weren't following it enough are going to end up buying stock and losing a lot of money. And it's going to be the everyday person. It's not going to be the hedge fund managers. So that's what I think is the problem here, is they're actually they're going to end up hurting the people they're claiming to, like. I mean, I don't really think the group is claiming to help anyone. They just wanted to screw with people and for whatever, they can do it as long as it's legal, and nothing they did was illegal. I think the bigger story here is what Robinhood did and all of them. And I think that's the much bigger, because I mean, it's kind of a two-part story, and I don't mean to get into it too much, but I think exposing that collusion at the brokerage level by shutting down those securities is the bigger story here, and
that's my point.
Right.
Like, regardless of what you, I think you're wrong about the GameStop thing, but that's okay, because I think Ben's wrong about it.
But I think
Ben sees it as a prank, and the fact that he thinks it's a prank is the problem. That's where I talk about his blind spot. It's not a prank. It was not a prank.
Yeah, but that even goes to what I would say. My point is, it seemed like populism was driving that movement, right? We could say it's a populist movement, to screw you to the elites. Okay, that screw you to the elites did not help the everyday person. It made a couple of people rich. It made a couple of people, a good. They walked away with a lot of money. But
if they all sold right now, every single one of them would be helped by it. So how do you figure it's not helping them? Because there is no them. It's each person who's holding those stocks.
Right.
So if each individual investor sells, and they bought the stock at $20 and they sell it at 200 or whatever.
Well, who are they selling to?
Huh?
Well, who are they selling to? Like, someone's going to be holding the losses in this situation, and it's going to be the everyday person. It's not going to be the hedge fund manager or the people they're going after. That's my point. Is I don't think it was more, I'm vindictive. I don't like the hedge fund people, therefore I'm going to do this. And that's why I think this is an example of how populism could be dangerous, because there's going to be some people who are going to end up buying that very, very high stock, and it's going to decrease by 2,000%, and they're going to be holding a bunch of losses.
Well, that would be their fault, if a person did it right now. But, like, is it? Now, first off, we're painting with a broad brush a really big group of people, and we're kind of in the weeds, but also not. So I think this is important to talk about. But I suppose there's probably for a big part of them, maybe even a majority, it was, I don't like these guys. Is it also fair to say that the reason they were saying we don't like these guys is because we think what they're doing is wrong, and so we want to, and also they have every right to do what they did. They can bet,
100%. Nothing they did was illegal.
I know it's not illegal, but we're not even talking about legality. They have every right to, their reasoning is honestly not that important. I don't think. They could also be thinking, I'm going to sell and make a bunch of money, because they could. Mm-hmm. And so, like, I'm not sure that they are wrong to say, I don't like these guys because I don't like what they're doing, because shorting GameStop or GameStop stock, it's like, why were they doing that? A lot of the times, whenever they put these shorts out, they create a self-fulfilling prophecy where the stock goes down because there's they all colluded to take out shorts against it. So it doesn't create any value, but they can hurt companies in the process because they felt like it, because they collude to short, which creates the thing, in the same way that these people colluded to fight against the short. And they could say, I don't like these guys. I don't like what they're doing. Also, I make a profit if I do this. But the broader issue that whatever motivation, that's fine. The broader issue, as you said, is I think this is it is a micro example of 2016. It so is. 2016, the establishment gets rejected by the election of Donald Trump, and they have two options. they can learn from it, have some humility, have some self-awareness, and grow and say, we want to listen to the complaints that created this, or they could coalesce, double down on their hubris, and say, no, F you. We are the ones in charge. We don't answer to you. And that's what they did. And that's what happened with the GameStop thing. There were a bunch of normal people who said, we can play this game. We can trade, we can do the same thing that you're doing, just in the opposite direction. We have every right to do this. And how did the establishment respond? They made it where they could, they literally rigged the game in front of their eyes. Mm-hmm. That's what happened with Robinhood. So these guys could unload their short positions. Now, I think some of them are saying, okay, we're going to get more. We're going to double down on the short because these guys will sell eventually. And it's a Mexican standoff at this point. But, that's the same answer. The establishment, instead of saying, why would they be mad at us, or why would they not like this thing where we collude to drive the price of a stock down, instead of doing that, and, which, by the way, doesn't add any value to anything. It doesn't add value. I'm all for capitalism, but a bunch of these guys getting together and saying, we're going to short this and then create that because it's got a huge short position against it. Yeah. It doesn't add value.
So I think we're going to disagree on this, because I don't think there's anything wrong with them short selling GameStop.
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah.
I'm saying that it doesn't, I don't think it adds value. I'm saying they have every right to do that if they want to do that. And there are people who can say, I don't like that. Mm-hmm. I don't like the fact that you're I think if these guys work together and take out a bunch of short positions, it's obvious that the market goes, okay, why are all these short positions taken out? And it hurts the price of the stock. What happens is that these hedge fund guys say, we're going to work together and short it. That's why other hedge funds aren't doing what the Reddit guys did, because they're all in on it in that way. And so for the average person to say, I want to get in on it, but in the opposite way, we'll do the same thing. I might not like what the hedge fund guys do, but they have every right to do it. That's my point. All I'm saying is that the establishment did the same thing. That's all I'm trying to get at, is they gave a big middle finger and locked to the regular people and locked them out. Right. And that's what just happened with the election of Joe Biden. The establishment coalesced and gave a big middle finger. What was the Time Magazine person of the year, if not a giant middle finger to average people? Regardless of what you think about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, you could think they're great. I don't think there's anyone that would make a legitimate, honest argument who is grounded in reality that they deserve that over the first responders and healthcare workers during the biggest pandemic in a century, right? That was only a middle finger to the people who voted the other way. And that's what happened with GameStop. It was what Robinhood did and how they colluded again was only a middle finger to those people. And that's all I'm saying, is that we have to, whatever you think the motivation with anything, if you keep giving people a giant middle finger whenever they're like, we just want to be part of the game, we just want to have our voices heard, whether it's have our voices heard through participating in the stock market the way we want to do it, or have our voices heard at the ballot box, or have our voices heard when it comes to concerns at the ballot box. If all people keep getting is a giant middle finger, it's going to create a monster. There's already a monster on the left that's going to continue to gain ascendancy based on that, like you said, envy and resentment. And it's going to happen on the right. It's already happening on the right. And I'm worried about either just the right and the left, that gaining ascendancy on the right in the same way the left is going to continue to gain ascendancy. And now we have both the left and the right being dominated by resentment, not trying to work together over ideas or trying to solve issues or argue about opinions, but just pure resentment, or something that unites both of those things in pure resentment, like French Revolution style. That's what I'm saying, is whatever you think about, GameStop or election or anything, or Black Lives Matter, anything, if more and more people keep getting the middle finger from the establishment, it's not going to create a good response. That's all I'm trying to say. So how do we address that? What do we do to address that and to keep the people who want to tap into that for power, or with only these pathological, awful answers, these solutions that only make things worse? Like that's what I'm saying. Where do we go from here? I mean, do you agree that that's a problem? Do you agree like with what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
what do you
Yeah,
think about
you and I, the from the whole GameStop thing, the major point, the important point on there, you and I 100% agree with. The small details at the beginning, the trading, the actual, the market stuff, we disagree, but that's not important to this conversation. I think, yeah, I mean, really, that's the question. That's I mean, a lot of, again, my problem with populism is not always the problem; it's the solution. Like you mentioned right at the beginning of this podcast, is a lot of times solutions the dangerous part, and there's just a lot of bad solutions that can come from populists, come elitists. It really doesn't matter, but finding ways to shut off the tap of what's the bad water that's going in society, and that's through legacy media, that's through you said Times Magazine. Obviously, I mean, they're more willing to give the cover to Hitler, I think, than any normal everyday person. That they're not going to just throw up like a Greta Thunberg as an elite, for a short period of time because it fits their narrative. I think getting a more diverse pool of communication resources. I mean, like Small Guys Daily Wire, or even people like on YouTube that you can get information from. Yeah, disinformation is always going to be a problem, but they act like it is just started to be a problem. They're just pissed off because their disinformation is not the main brand of the day. Now there's a variety of disinformation. Like that's the problem with them, and that's why you have all these incredibly stupid narratives going around, and that's why the everyday person just feels screwed. It's like, you're lying to me. I can tell you're lying to me, but I can't. It's so difficult to find the truth now because I just have people shoving their narratives in my face rather than actually saying, all right, this is actually what happened. And you'll see sometimes the best way to get news is your local news station. Yeah, there can be some bias there, but they're at least going to give you the facts. Where so often now the facts are like on page 10 and all the opinion and commentary preceded, right? So we need to figure out a way to really figure out or figure out a way to bypass these resources and create um, different avenues of information, or whatever. It depends on what you're talking about. Again, when we talked about higher education, well, sometimes we need to be able to convince people to like, if I'm hiring someone, right, I would traditionally say, I'm going to see where you went to school, I'm going to check your GPA, I'm going to do all these things. Now it's like, okay, I've been in the industry for a while, I really don't care, honestly, if you went to college. I want to know, are you interested? Do you have intellectual curiosity to figure out and problem solve by yourself, or you need someone to hold your hand for you? That's what I'm looking for. So I'm breaking the tradition of, did you go to a proper college? Did you get over a 3.5 GPA? These are the things that used to be important to me. But now I understand, I just want an efficient worker who is going to grow with the company. That's what I'm looking for now. So it's changing my mode of understanding when it comes to again, growing a business or whatever you need to do. I'm sorry if this is kind of sidetracking, but I'm trying to basically make the point. You got to find the alternatives, and you be willing to create the alternatives, and you need to stop listening to the people saying these alternatives are bad and they're hurting media by having more competition, is effectively what they're saying now. And I think it's a major problem. I mean, you see it with schools. These private schools, these charter schools are hurting the public schools. Why? Because they're better than we are. That's really what it comes down to.
Well, the people who would make those decisions of what you're talking about. So the example you just gave is, a company that changes its paradigms, right?
Mm-hmm.
The people making those decisions are not the ones who understand those new paradigms. It's like we have a story. We have a national story. We've got a lot of them, but there's one that we have that is, this kind of opaque notion of how to be successful in America that we've been telling ourselves since World War II. Actually, since the beginning of our country, that has changed fundamentally since World War II. It would be as if, and the people who are making those decisions, like you just said, like a company or whatever, it'd be like if I lived in a town for, however many years, and there was this, like, one restaurant that I went to that had this delicious food and everything was the best and the best service and everything. And then I moved out of that town and my kid was moving to that town. And I told him here's the places you got to go. Here's the fastest, route to these or whatever. And in the interim, the restaurant management, changed and their food sucked and they had all these food violations and all the fastest routes to get to places had changed. And actually a lot of them were dead ends. And I'm on the phone telling my kid like, no, the food there is great. No, that's the fastest way. And he's like, what are you talking about? Like, no, they're spitting in food and that road doesn't even exist anymore. And instead of going, well, no, okay, maybe something's changed. I kept saying, no, the food there is great. You will love it. It is the best food. That is the fastest route. That's what's happening. The story of how our parents or our grandparents, were able to, succeed in America, the blueprint that they used doesn't apply anymore. It doesn't. It applies in some select cases, but for most people, it's changed. How, the news isn't news anymore. All the people that are still passing down the blueprint for success are operating on the paradigm, either on purpose or either out of ignorance or malice, or both, that the news is still news. The people who had no problem going to college and paying their tuition with a part-time job and getting out and getting a salary, that was workable and not having to worry about debt or very much of it, or being able to declare bankruptcy on that debt and were able to get a house, are still passing that blueprint down when that only applies to people who would say, go in and get like engineering, like you're talking about. Like it's a select few people that works for them. And it's not even the same classes anymore, or the same occupations. Like law is saturated. Lawyers it's not the same occupation as it used to be. Like my cousin's a lawyer and he's a pretty smart guy and he is not doing so hot financially, not from his own, he also is living in one of the most expensive places in the country. But anyway, real estate prices aren't the same. Debt is not the same. College is not the same. These stories that this national idea of how to be successful has changed. And the people who are passing the blueprint down, it's like, no, this is how you do it. This is the only way. This is how it works. And actually, if you do this other stuff, we're going to denigrate you. So if you don't go to college, it's like, oh, why not? It's, or any of those things. Oh, you watch people on YouTube, like what you are, some alt-right, whatever thing. You see what I'm saying? And so that has changed and we have to address that. And the problem is, as you said, like people have to change their paradigms, whether it's in the business or whatever, but the people who are in the position to do that aren't the type of person to either realize there's a problem or it doesn't really matter to them because they're part of that same group who that system does work for them. Like they have great healthcare, so they don't have to worry about, they can say, yeah, Medicare for all. Why not? Like I've got good healthcare, or you know what I'm saying? So they'll either say there's no problem or they'll buy into whatever thing because they don't understand the nature of it. So they're like, whatever. But the people who need to change the paradigms and start like adapting the blueprint to the new situation aren't the ones who are doing that. And I don't know what to do about that issue. The dichotomy between people who understand the problems and are experiencing these problems and who don't care or have bad solutions for it is increasingly stark. And it is so obvious. And that's what worries me. Mm-hmm. So yeah, people need to change the paradigms. The people in position to do so aren't doing it. So now what?
That's naturally going to correct itself as generations move on, though. Taking an example of hiring. Like, let's say theoretically, because my boss isn't like this, my boss says, I need you to hire someone with an engineering degree who went to this select amount of colleges and graduated with more than 3.5 GPA. I'm like, I don't think that's important, but I'll do it. I eventually become an owner of my own company, and I establish this new, paradigm, this new test in order to get to my company. I don't really care, honestly, if you went. The only reason I like it that you went to the engineering college, it shows me that you're interested in engineering and you just don't want a high paying job just because you're like, oh, I'm going to take advantage of it, right? So these things, you'd ideally, again, I think they have stagnated too long. Like these things haven't worked for a long time to the point we should have probably course corrected by now. Do you think there's still a chance as new generations come along and they become the ones in power that these things will naturally change? Because I see this as like a two-sided coin. I do think they'll naturally change. I just don't know if they're going to be good changes, right?
Yep.
Because
That's the problem.
right, I could be the opposite, where I could either be, like my position where I want to hire someone. I don't really care if you have an engineering degree, or I'm going to hire someone with only liberal arts degrees or something like that,
Yep.
or something that's completely useless.
Yeah. So
no offense.
I don't have a liberal arts degree.
Well, to anyone listening.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it will, like, that's what I was saying earlier. I have no doubt that the insurmountable nature of these problems are only going to get worse. And they are increasingly the elephant in the room. And so like I said earlier, there are the movement on the left that is at least talking about him is going to be the thing. And I would argue it already is the thing that's going to gain ascendancy if it hasn't already. Because of the severity of these issues and the amount of people, like just the sheer numbers of people that they impact. So yeah, it will. And I worry about on the right, that's why I said there has to be something that seriously answers it. Because if it doesn't, a pathological version will answer it instead. I mean, you could argue that Trump was addressing those things in a lot of ways. I mean, went to the inner city and said, what the hell do you have to lose? And so I worry about it like a more pathological version of that. So yeah, of course it's going to be addressed. Do I think that it'll course correct? Do I think that that's going to happen? I doubt it, because these issues are either ignored or they're not talked about in an honest way. And I had something and then I lost it. I thought of whenever you were talking earlier, but it is so entrenched. Like what you're describing is whenever you talked about how if you gain your own business and then you change those paradigms or whatever, like the next generation, let's say that happens. What we're basically describing is sorting mechanisms. And so we have like the idea of even being aware of a sorting mechanism and coming up with a new sorting mechanism is so complicated. I'm not sure that that's going to happen anytime soon. So I think it's much more likely that, it'll be what you said, where they only hire liberal arts and another way to think about it is, so, I mean, I guess there's two versions of this. One of them is you're only going to be like the type of person who is succeeding in this system is the type of person who I think a big one is if your parents helped pay for your college or you're able to get some really good scholarships that paid for your college. Like I really think debt increasingly, I see that as like a stark divide. Like the friends I have, and myself who have a lot of student loan debt, the way our lives look compared to our friends who don't have any or were able to like get it or had a small amount or able to get it taken care of really early is radically different. And so like, I think that you'll either be the type of person like who's in the position to hire people or whatever, who the system worked for you, I guess, or for whatever reason, like you were shielded from some of those issues. So you're probably going to hire more people like yourself, perhaps, or like you said, it's just going to be more and more people who are just filled with resentment that get hired, and then they hire more people like themselves, like you said, liberal arts degrees.
Yeah,
no offense.
I mean, I wrote about it a couple of days ago. I just put a small comment out there. I don't even know where I put this, but I said I said exactly what I said here. It's like engineers, I used to worry about the degree and GPA, and now I just worry about, are you interested in the job? And it's nice to see an engineering degree just to let me know you're interested in it. But I literally said it's become a sorting mechanism, and you probably shouldn't, although I didn't say this part, you probably shouldn't have to pay $200,000 for a sorting mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
I know like Shapiro talks about Stanford Law, and it's like their teachers or their professors basically just say, yeah, you're here now. You've already done your job. The hard part's getting in. Now you can just do whatever. You're going to get a job no matter what. And I'm like, interesting, but that's awful. Like that's not the way it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to gain your experience. So, but I mean, like an interesting example, I forgot the press secretary now, but when someone brought up the GameStop thing, her response is, well, I think it's the Treasury Secretary has a vagina, so we're safe. It's like that's the sorting mechanism I'm scared of. I use liberal arts degree. I didn't use the obvious one. Are they black? Are they transgender? Are they what kind of genitalia do they have? Like instead of competence and experience and even education, which I'm not saying is not important, but I think sometimes the university system is actually a roadblock towards education. And that is why it's so corrupted now. I forgot who said it.
Rule right now.
Right. Yeah. I forgot who said it. I think it's Corolla is the one who said, don't let college get in the way of your education, and that's really what it is now. I mean, it's become awful. And that's why I think it basically is so far that it has to basically die or cease to exist, or, even online class, stuff like that. But yeah, that's the scary part. Sorting mechanisms like race and gender or transgender or whatever, whatever the hierarchy of genders is going to be in 10 years. That's what they're using to sort. And then the competence shoots down. It doesn't help society at all when we do things like that.
So, I mean, I agree. I'm still just sitting here going, like, what do we like? What the hell do we do about that? Like, and there are so many ways in which, we can tie the amount of concentric circles between the ways in which the university is an issue are large, whether it's they're creating activists, they're not actually educating people, the debt issue, like all those things. And that they contribute to it. And the same with the establishment media, which, as Matt Taibbi writes about, journalists now are very different than they used to be. A journalist, it was a very blue collar position. You understood average people. And so you're able to speak to that. Whereas now they're the elites. Journalists are part of the elite class. And so they represent the elite class, except for when they're, doing their pet projects to make it seem like they care about regular people in between segments, making fun of people that eat at Olive Garden,
It seemed like it started out where journalists had to beg to talk to a certain politician, and now politicians have to beg to talk to certain journalists.
Exactly. That's a really good way of putting it. And so that establishment is also part of the, that like what Eric Weinstein calls the gated institutional narrative, where they're the ones who are continually, reinforcing that blueprint, right? Like what is baked into every single one of their, whenever they fondly discuss this idea of canceling student loan debt or making it free or whatever, is the idea is college is, your blueprint for success, as opposed to something else. So there's a lot of ways in which this is intertwined, where, like you said earlier, people getting access to that information and people understanding these things. And so we have a lot of barriers to that information on an institutional level. So I just keep, coming back to what do we do about it? And how do we keep the pathological answer from arising on the right? And then we just have a right and left that are completely based in resentment, that aren't going to get anything done, and that will literally destroy the country. I mean, there's a lot of ways in which the country gets destroyed. It's like the education thing, entitlement programs, all of this stuff, it's like in Avengers Endgame.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
There's 10 million, however many ways in which we lose, and there's one in which. And so
I was trying to get to the pop culture reference before you could, and I couldn't. I was gonna interject and be like, "Wait, I got one," and then you said the exact same thing I was about to say.
So I mean, what are your thoughts? And that, again, that's why I brought up the populism at the beginning, because that seems like safeguarding and trying to foster a healthy movement. Again, I don't care if it's on the right or left at this point in time, but a healthy movement that actually addresses these things. There's gonna be a thing that grows to answer it. There already is one on the left. How do we get a healthy one, whether it's on the right or one that pulls people in from the left? Like,
I mean, it's hard to engage like the health of a movement because it's dictated a lot on the leadership of the movement. And it reminds me again of another Adam Carolla thing when it came to the Capitol riots. We know people who were there who are like good people. They didn't rush into the Capitol. They're extremely respectful. And Carolla's line is like, if you're ever, in a march, understand who's at the front of it. Right. Yep. And it's the same thing with this movement. And that's why I caution against populism sometimes is like a populist candidate can give you, hey, this is the problem. It's a real problem. Here's actually a good solution. Just understand sometimes the intentions are to gain power more so than solve a problem. Or, they want to gain ascendancy by that. So that's my caution against populism. But maybe, that's maybe a definition difference between you and I. And maybe it's not super important for this conversation.
It's also basically unavoidable at this point, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, we end with this question, I think, at all of our podcasts. What do we do to fix the problem? And it's kind of generally the same problem. And you have to create a movement. And, you and I have talked about that before. And the questions that I actually had kind of go into this. And I know we're already at like an hour and a half. So I don't know if we want to dive into these questions or kind of use it as a launching point.
I was just texting. I'm going to go shoot with a buddy. But I was just texting him, telling him that I'm, still going. So it's sure. Fine. We can go a little bit longer for sure.
Yeah.
Like, and let me really fast.
Yeah.
I think that part of the starting place is acknowledging the problems in their reality. Like there's this thing that I call the devil's deceit, which is where you start with a premise that everyone agrees on, but then you draw a radically incorrect conclusion and invite other people to accept your conclusion. And so like part of it has to be like twofold. One is addressing the problem in reality. So again, I'll use student loan debt. Saying that student loan debt is an issue is addressing the problem in reality. But we don't ever go deeper into that. Like you said about the government subsidizing loans and, not being able to declare it in bankruptcy,
right?
Which the government stopped allowing after they started subsidizing the loans, so there is this huge circle there. And so like part of it to me seems like, let's figure out like how to plainly and clearly, because it's like, where do we go from here? Well, I'm not sure that there's anyone that is clearly and plainly and honestly even articulating these problems. Like what we're talking about here. I don't hear honest conversations about these problems. And like to what you said, I do think it'd be interesting to talk about the capital stuff at some point. We don't have to here. Because I suspect we probably have different opinions on that, but like, we don't like the twofold issue is no one's clearly addressing these problems in a way that people like understand, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like
it's a CRT issue too, right? James Lindsay's amazing at breaking down CRT, not for the normal everyday person. The everyday person, everything he says can go right over their head because it's just too dense, and you got to create a simpler, more introduction form of that in order for people to understand what's wrong with it.
Right. And another issue is, on top of this, is I'm not sure that's even possible in some cases. Like, Michael Scott, explain it to me like I'm 5, explain it to me like I'm 3.
Tear down.
Like some things can be simplified. Other things can't. Deeply.
And it's by design too, by the way. Like CRT is academic by design. It's not meant to be easily broken down. And that's why
there are other issues that I think you reach a point of what you would call the irreducible minimum, right? So you can't reduce it anymore. And in order to understand or communicate it, here's the minimum amount. And I think some things have an irreducible minimum that is still pretty dense. And that's the issue, is that complicated issues require complicated solutions oftentimes, or at least and complicated explanations. And it's not necessarily the fault of anyone, whether it's James or I don't care what the issue is. It could be a doctor trying to explain an illness or something. The explainer's fault that it's complicated. It's like, okay, I could do my best. And part of that, a thought I just had is, I think people are okay if they don't quite understand, as long as they trust the person giving them the information. So if a doctor says, here's the surgery I have to do, and they explain it to me, and I do not follow what they're talking about because it's an incredibly intricate surgery. At the end of the day, if I trust them, I don't need to understand all the details, as to say, yeah, give me the surgery. And so part of what we're seeing, and maybe this is a bit of a feedback loop where there's this loss of trust in institutions. And so the people who are willing to offer the complex answers that apply nuance, the dying idea of nuance, people don't trust them, or they don't listen to them. And they're increasingly tuned into people who offer them really simple sound bites and really simple, oversimplified, unnuanced answers, because those people might be more trustworthy to them, or might be more charismatic, and at least they're addressing the thing in a way they're telling them what they want to hear. I don't know. And so basically the institution, the loss of trust in institutions creates a system where it's difficult for them to self-correct, because people aren't listening to those who they might perceive as part of it, who could actually give them a good answer, something like that. But either way, my point is that we have to have someone addressing it, and then also have someone like I said earlier, I don't think anyone is actually addressing these issues in an honest and robust way, like actually addressing the problem. And then where do we go from here is, what do you do once that those problems have been aired in an honest and robust way? So I guess the issue is twofold. So how do we get that to people? And maybe you just answered it, which is, we got to figure out a way to simplify it. And if not, figure out at least what the irreducible minimum is. And then
it's simplifying it. And also, you can't explain the problem, propose your solution, go down the avenue of solution, forget the problem. You know what I mean? So there's an avenue in which you can say, poverty is a problem. We need to help people pull themselves up by their bootstraps. So let's give them some money. And then, we find out it's kind of the lottery problem. If you get most people who win the lottery end up, in the same spot they started with before they won the lottery, because it's not about the money, it's about the management of the money, right? You can't expect, it's the same problem we had after slavery. Like, you can't just have all these prior slaves just, all right, do your own thing. And it's like, well, where do we go? We started with nothing. Like, how do we expect to build? I mean, it's a slow build, but there are problems and concerns with it. But when you have a problem, again, like poverty, that you say, we're going to give you a bunch of money, you start to forget the problem being that people need to learn how to make their own money. People need to learn how to build their own capital, or become successful, or figure out, what avenues to take for a good education or something like that. And we start to implement the solution that give them money. And then the problem just is whatever. And then it's just general poverty. You keep giving them money as the automatic solution. But we forgot the original starting point we should have started with, which is like, the war on poverty wasn't meant to necessarily reduce poverty, but reduce the reliance on, the state effectively. That was the original, in the original documentation of the war on poverty. And again, just completely forgot it. So I think it's important to understand, when we have these problems like student loan debt, it's easy to say, well, let's pay off the student loan debt. Let's just use the government's, bottomless pit of money that the government apparently has, and just pay it off, rather than solve the problem. The problem is, these institutions are charging an insane amount for this kind of education that sometimes is good, and most of the times you finished a lot of these degrees and you're not any better off than you were before you went into college, because your the field you're trying to go into doesn't necessarily require a 4-year college degree, or like a graduate degree. And instead, we're just solving the problem at the back end to just pay off the debts instead of lowering the cost of education and not forcing it down on the institution, but to actually say, okay, we can't have loans guaranteed by the government with not eligible to be erased, but with bankruptcy. Some of the most obvious things that would, I think, help at least future generations of people going to college. I know it hurts because the people who, like you and I, who've already went through there, aren't really going to have our problem solved, right? So it's unfortunate, but like you said, you have to accept, and this is what I tell people all the time. Like I signed the dotted line. I saw they didn't hide anything on me. This is what happened, and I have to accept the consequences. And I know it sucks for a lot of people, but again, you have to take accountability for what you do. But
I'm not sure that, and I think this is worth saying. I'm not sure I agree with the statement that they didn't hide anything, and here's what I mean by that. Would you say that the average person, or you can put yourself in this category, whenever they are put in the position to sign the dotted line, has even the shred of financial literacy required to understand compound interest and the student loan debt and the ways in which it will impact their lives in the future, not just that semester, but like, okay, here's what this, and all of that. Like,
say, are you telling me an 18-year-old doesn't understand compounding interest? What are you talking about?
Well, what I'm saying is that like, whenever people can sign up for things where the information isn't hidden from them and still have no idea what they're signing up for because they don't get the thing in its totality, I guess is my point. Yeah. Like predatory lending or anything like that. All I'm saying is no one explains that. And that's where I talk about how we have to address the story nationally. I'm not sure, like, I don't blame my parents for not explaining those things to me because, again, the blueprint was different for them. Mm-hmm. So they're operating on the best information they had. The university system is a bit of a different story, but it's also not necessarily on them to explain all that, nor is it in their best interest to do so from a financial standpoint. So I don't really blame them. I think it's unethical, but it's, it is what it is. So, but again, I'm just saying, here's the issue, but something has to be done about that. Like kids have to have, and the type of the institutions that would give them the information of like, dude, this is what you're signing up for. Or, one of the things I use as a heuristic for this is whenever I was in college, I met a lot of students because I did ministry. And so, and a very common thing to hear from students was if you said, what's your major? They would say, I don't really know. I'm going to get my gen eds out of the way. And, then I'll figure it out. And the heuristic I use is that shouldn't be a normal thing that a person feels comfortable saying, or that if someone hears it, that they don't go, okay, wait a second, stop. Have you thought about this? Like, in other words, that type of mentality was so ubiquitous when I was in college that no one had those thoughts. No one thought that might be a mistake, or you're getting in a lot of debt and you're just here because you assume you ought to be. Well, why do you assume that? You know what I'm saying? And you assume this is worth it. You assume that you're going to find something, like all of these things. There's all these underlying assumptions that need to be addressed. And so my heuristic is that should never be a normal statement that's said. And if it is, it should never be a statement that doesn't receive pushback. It shouldn't be ubiquitous.
I mean, I think the institutions, if they actually are looking out for the well-being of their students, should almost implement like an NFL, NBA policy where the NBA fluctuates on this. So they say you have to have at least a year of college before you're eligible for the NBA. The NFL is at least 2 years of college before entering the NFL. Like, if I were an institution, and then like the college I went to kind of set it up this way. It's like you're 18 years old out of high school. You're not eligible to come to our college. You need to have worked for a year or two, understand how money management works, and then we'll consider you. Like the average person who enters college, although I'm sure it is relatively high, should be like 20 or 21, at least to give them a chance to understand the real world. And the other problem to that is every semester of your high school years should have a financial course in it. And I know I went to public school for high school and I didn't have one. And I don't even know if it was an elective or anything. So that's dropping the ball there.
In home ec, we had a thing on, I think, balancing your like a checkbook and stuff like that. So there was and then I had a class, an economics class my senior year, where we learned about like investing and stuff. And we would play with these like fake stock accounts, but nothing about the concept of debt, compound interest, and also like it's one thing to tell a person smoking might not be good for you. You should think about it. It's another thing entirely to show them pictures of like lungs covered in tar and stuff. And so we don't have that for like that version. Like, I really think that it's a serious thing, the amount of people that like get degrees that will pay them less on average than like a garbage truck driver, if they even get a job in that field at all, because it's so saturated. We need the here's what your lungs look like. We need here's what your life is likely to look like if you get this degree. For some people, it's fine. But for the majority of people, get used to making lattes, because that's probably what you're going to be doing. The statistics on people that have jobs in the field that they got a degree in now, it's increasingly low, or it's lower every year. And so you see what I'm saying? So even like, it has to be not just here's some like facts and figures, but there's a reason why those tactics work of like, here's a picture. Like, we respond more viscerally to that because there's a concept and then there's a reality. People need to be given the reality of those things.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the closest I ever got to learning financial responsibility in high school is in shop class, where I made a ninja star on the back, threw it at a chair, and they made me pay for it. And, nothing outside of that. So I think there's certainly there's the disconnect between education and the real world. They like to kind of say in academia, where education, the whole point of college and high school is to prepare you for the real world. And now it's kind of like a secondary, objective for them. So,
well, it's terraforming it, right? That's what these diversity, equity, inclusion things, you make a bunch of activists and then send them out to terraform the businesses so that they are prepared, because they're learning all about the oppression. They're learning about a lot of things. They're increasingly applicable, like how to say these right words whenever you get hired. Part of the application process is, what have you done to advance, racial equality or something like that. So they are learning, but they're not learning things that are useful, right? So even that's changed. So that's one of those concentric circles. But your point is still accurate. It's preparing them, but not in a way that is actually preparing them for things that matter.
Yeah. So to kind of go back to where we were when we first started going down this road was, you got to be held accountable for the documentation you're putting your signature on. It doesn't mean it's right. Doesn't mean it's fair. Obviously, again, the best thing they could do to me is fix the system now for future generations, but I'm going to have to pay what I owe. It's unfortunate. It sucks. Not my ideal situation, but it's a compromise that I have to be willing to swallow, because to me, I'm more worried about my son going to college than I am about me paying off my debt, because I can pay it for now. So, that's just one example of a broken institution that people are talking about. They're proposing a solution and then they completely forget like the problem, like the cause of the problem. Right. So I think that's something when it comes to the pushback against this, any movement on the right, like understand the problem. Someone needs to be there to clearly state the problem and not its most simplest form, but not super overcomplicated. And someone needs to be there at the solution, but there's always got to be the guy saying, hey, remember, the problem is this, the problem is this. And that's kind of the same thing. It's like if you have a more populist movement, let's call it, if the person is there reteaching the problem and grounding solution and founding principle is what we ought to do, I think it'll be a healthy, movement in that respect. But the question I was going to gauge or send to you and see and get your opinion on, and again, I don't know if we have time because now we're almost at 2 hours, but what does the right do? And by the right, I'm not saying conservatives or, neoconservatives. I'm saying everyone left out of the left at this point, right? Because the libertarians are now considered the right. I think you're now considered on the right. There's so many people considered on the right who do not typically identify with republicanism as we would think of it as, that they're just forced there because they no longer belong on the ascendant left right now. But what does the right do now? Right now, it's kind of a, can they chew gum and walk at the same time? Can they fix their own movement and continue it after Trump and also push back on the progressive left now? Or do they have to choose one? Obviously, the ideal case is like the right is going to do both at the same time, to push back against all these new awful ideas coming from the left and also making sure they fix their own movement so they're ready for 2022 and just ready in general to push back and change some of these institutions and change the paradigms. But I don't have complete faith they're going to be able to work on both those fronts at the same time. And what I think is, instead of, fixing both issues, they're going to half, I don't normally swear on my podcast, they're going to half-ass it on both of them instead of full-assing it on one, right? So, that's my concern moving forward, is where are they going to shift the focus? Because I can see it now as to just focusing on the right, figuring out what does post-Trump right look like? How do we move forward without splintering into different, sects? And that'll really hurt us in 2022. And can you recover by 2024? Or are you going to focus more on pushing back on the current administration now, just making sure they stay more towards the center instead of going all out on the left? Because the next 4 years could be extremely damaging if there's not an appropriate amount of pushback and no one identifying this problem, which I have no faith that a lot of people from the left are going to be able to identify the problem, or if they do, they're going to propose, their version of the solution.
So I can give you, I think there's two answers. I think there is a way to do it. Like I'm trying to remember, there's a word for whenever something is a natural result of something else, but it's not like the prime purpose. So an example would be a light bulb is intended to generate light, and a byproduct of that is that it also creates heat. But the purpose of a light bulb isn't to create heat, it's to create light.
Externality?
So, no, it's not an externality. There's a word for it, like a scientific word, but I can't remember. But anyway, so, you could say if the non-left was to really focus, like, start with first principles and then create a movement based on first principles, it would also naturally oppose the left's answers to things, just by virtue of giving a different, like a counter, I guess, an alternative to the left's answers to things. Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't necessarily have to focus on it, because it would just be a natural byproduct of that.
I just don't think all the problems of the right are going to have that convenience, right? Mitt Romney fighting with Donald Trump, and I'm putting them as placeholders for that type of people on the right, that type of ideology. I don't think that fight is going to have that, that unintended consequence of being able to fix a problem on the left. Right?
Sure.
It's too internal. It's too insulated, I think.
No, because what's the opposite of what you just described? Unity. Unity in a mission.
Wait,
unity.
Real unity or Biden unity?
Obviously, real unity.
Okay.
But
very different.
It is. But so if they fixing it means coalescence, unifying around first principles, and so like addressing that, like infighting, the opposite of that is unity. And unity is, here's what we stand for, here's what we stand behind, which is naturally alternatives to the left. and answers that in an effective way. Now, that I think is the way it could be done. What I think will happen is basically, I mean, we've already seen, so Kevin McCarthy went down and met with Trump, and it was about 2022. And, basically saying, will you support congressional candidates and campaigns so that we can win the House? So that's there. Trumpism is there. I think the Ben Sasses and the Mitt Romneys are going to be increasingly few. I think that they're going to be like the who is the Democrat from, it was either Alaska or Michigan, that voted for my God, why am I drawing a blank on the Supreme Court justice who?
Oh, the Democrat? Was it? It's not Manchin. That's West Virginia. But
no.
Yeah.
With the dude that got accused of all the gang rape stuff, man. Why am I drawing a blank on his name? The Supreme Court.
Oh, Kavanaugh?
Kavanaugh. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So there was one Democrat who voted for Kavanaugh, I think, or, to confirm him.
Yeah.
And stepped out of party lines. I think that is a proxy for what, like, the Ben Sasses and the Mitt Romneys are going to be. I think they're going to be a minority within the party. They're going to basically do what McCain did in his last final act of middle finger to Trump, and probably screw up any attempts that the right makes at actually legislating, which is what they aren't traditionally known for. So that's what I think will happen. And to the broader context of this conversation, I think it would be a mistake not to try and figure out how to weave the appeal of Trump into what they do going forward. Because the appeal of Trump is what I've been talking about this whole time. And so, but the trick is, how do you do that without fostering resentment? That's another thing. And as I have mentioned here multiple times now, it is a very big concern of mine. I do hope that if you get, so let's take a few people who at least are kind of in the news on the right. So Ted Cruz, you have Sarah Huckabee running for governor in Arkansas. And you have, so Dan Crenshaw has kind of been out of it, but, is, a person on the right. Kevin McCarthy, of course, now. Mike Pence is going to have to kind of find his place. None of those are people who I see as being fundamentally grounded in resentment or trying to build a brand based on resentment. But those are the people who I think are going to be largely shaping the right going forward. Now,
and you mean they're not going to advocate for resentment? That's what you're.
I don't think so. I don't see that as being part of
because there's two sides. Are they going to be resented? Because the problem is all of those guys are going to be linked to Trump. So there's obviously the left that they're going to use that as their launching point to eventually call them a Nazi, which is going to be the next sentence. And then, but the bigger problem, I suppose, is again the Mitt Romney. I'm just having him as a stand-in for kind of the neoconservative,
right,
old age conservative types who will also not vote for him because his name was mentioned next to Trump. So there's resentment for him, but they're not advocating for it. So I think I understand what you mean. I just want to be clear.
Yeah. I mean, maybe the one exception would be Josh Hawley.
Yeah.
He's, or another one, what's his name? Matt Getz.
Getz, yeah.
Yeah. Those two are a little bit more, but, I equate them to they're squeaky wheels. They're kind of like the, I use this.
Gates, I get that impression quite a bit. Hawley's a bit different.
Yeah. I mean, they're kind of, the same, as like Eric Swalwell or an AOC. What I mean is, yeah, their voice is out there. Yeah, it matters, to some degree, but I don't really see that shaping the party. Now, I think AOC is a little bit, a different case there. But my point is that you're always going to have that, is all I'm trying to say. You're always going to have, people in Congress who are going to be a little bit more of a firebrand than others. So, yeah, we can acknowledge that. The question is, how much influence do they have, on the overall, what you'd say is the movement? Some, sure, but I think the names I mentioned before are going to be more influential. So, I think the right, what they will do is they'll have that infighting, but that's going to happen. What I worry about, so let's look at it from a leadership standpoint and from a followership standpoint. The leadership will do what leaderships always do, which is, and what the left did, there is always going to be unity in the pursuit of power. So, and then you see a lot more disunity once you have it. So they'll coalesce as they have to. What I worry about is there's going to be increasingly, a large number of people in the followership who see through the BS or are completely disillusioned with the system that just don't show up to vote. That there is a huge percentage of people on that side right now who think that the system is completely rigged. Whether there's a variety of methods they could use to claim that. For example, like Kim Strassel talks about the legal methods of rigging it, like with ballot harvesting and all these other things. There's a lot of legal ways that the system is rigged. And so, I worry about whatever the leadership does, that that there are millions of people that are just not going to show up because they'll say, what's the point? Who don't want they'll see it as, I'm not going to get my hopes up. I don't think we're going to win. I don't think it matters. My vote doesn't count, because we're not going to see any, the opposite of that would be people that feel a significant amount of faith in the election system on the right. And the only way you do that is through reform, through one, addressing the problem, and two, reform that people can look at and go, okay, yeah, fair enough. I see, and transparency. And that's not going to happen over the next couple of years at all. And so, people are going to be understandably disillusioned with it. And so whatever the leadership does, I worry about people going, well, okay, I get it. What's the point? Yeah, what you said is great. I might love you to death, but it's rigged against us. We can't win. And so they just stay home. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Well, I think that's part of it, for sure.
So let me address the part about the opposing the left. Can they do both? Mm-hmm. I worry that what they will coalesce around will be opposing the left. And that is a temporary solution. Like I said, they'll unite in pursuit of power when they have to. But that's not an actual solution. So, I fear that they will go for the low-hanging fruit, which is the resentment of, what is taking place and what will take place legislatively over the next couple of years. And they'll go for that and tap into that. But that's not, there's two ways to oppose someone, one, or at least two. One is to say, I hate you, you suck. And another is to say, okay, your idea is bogus. Here's a better one. And I fear that they will do more of the first thing than the second thing. And that it'll be more likely that it'll be the resentment movement on the left or on the right will gain ascendancy as the one on the left has. That's my fear. And that's what I think is the most probable outcome. I'm not saying that it's unavoidable. I think it is avoidable.
Well, I think the scary thing is they saw the left use it and win.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
like, we know this is a proven strategy that works. I would argue
All
the
of the
left has been doing it for
lessons,
a long time, but they've done it in a
no one will learn the correct lessons from the last 4 years, and people will only learn the worst possible lessons from the last 4 years. So if you're on the left, you learn that disinformation and generating fabricated chaos wins, and hatred wins, and using, water, just basically making terms like racism meaningless through how much you use it. But that's a winning strategy, and you can always rely on the establishment media to cover your back. And so let's do that again, regardless of the damage to the social fabric. And if you're on the right, you'll learn that appealing to minorities won't win because you didn't win. So trying to do that, the group that they lost the most votes of is white males. So they'll probably, at least subconsciously or unconsciously, reach out more to white people than minorities. That's obviously a very broad speculation, but I think there's probably something to that.
yeah.
Like, in other
Yeah,
words,
I
there's a
don't
big
think
focus
that's going to
on,
happen. I think they're
well,
going to keep trying to move.
maybe,
Yeah.
maybe, but it's at least true on a factual level to say that they learned that appealing to minority voters and even getting a bunch of minority voters doesn't win them the election. Or it didn't win them the election for whatever reason. So that's a factual statement. Now, what they do with that statement, of course, it varies. But that sucks. And on the other side, minority voters learned that if they vote for the right, they'll lose. And so that's not good. And the right will also look at all the strategies that the left did and go, hey, it worked. We were able to generate unity with low res hot takes on things and tweets and disinformation and fomenting hatred more than ideas. Donald Trump, and I blame a lot of this on our media, but there were actually some pretty good ideas baked into his, at least, policy that came out of that administration, whether it's trade or immigration or addressing education, like the Title IX stuff with Betsy DeVos, or the 1776 stuff, getting CRT stuff out. Those are all like Middle East, not starting wars, being willing to not care what other countries think. Those are all things that had really great results, but they lost. So they're not going to take the lessons that, I guess, outcomes are important even if you still lose. Like, you still need to, like, watch the game tape, and look at what we did right and learn from it, even if you lost the game. But unfortunately, in politics, everything is outcomes based and outcomes justified. So if you win, it must mean that everything you did was right and everything the opponent did was wrong. And if you lose, it must mean you were wrong, and what you did what wasn't correct, and the opponent had something, maybe they were right or something, to that effect. And so people are going to take the wrong lessons, I believe, all of the wrong lessons, and ignore the good lessons that came from it. So, because your question was, can they do both? Can they oppose the left, and can they fix this infighting? There's always going to be infighting. That's always been around. We have a two-party system, but there's lots of little coalitions within those groups. So you're always going to have that. The question is, how big of a detriment or hindrance are those little coalitions to actually getting things done? I don't know. I think in the pursuit of power, they'll coalesce as they need to. But the bigger issue is, what do they coalesce around? And if it's just opposing the left, okay, and what does that look like? Is it on policy, or is it resentment? I think it'll be resentment, not policy, more than not. And then I'm not sure any of it will matter how unified they are, how great the message is, because I don't think people are going to show up until they have faith restored in the system generally. So does that answer your question?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not. I don't really have a solid answer. Mine's going to be basically what you said. I think the left kind of showed that they have the radical side that's actually a relatively few people, and then the more traditional liberal side who just oppose Trump, and they learned how to unify behind that. But then the radical side threatened the moderate side enough to basically bend to their will. And I don't know if the right's going to have that same dynamic, but I think they'll unify. But again, that's the big problem: is, are they going to come out just as a left alternative and still propose awful solutions to some real problems. So yeah, I mean, that really answers what I got. Do you think? I mean, no, I was going to ask you, how do you think 2022 will work out? But that's too early for that one.
I don't think it's too early for that. I think they're going to lose big time. I think the Democrats will maintain the majority. Again, there's two ways to look at how voters on the non-Biden voters will respond to this election. And you have to ask yourself this question. How many people are going to look at what happened and have a fire lit under their ass to really want to dig down and say, we got to work that much harder next time, which requires an underlying assumption of faith in the system? And how many people will walk away having their faith in the system completely shattered, or shattered enough to keep them from showing up or to keep them from participating? And which number will be greater? Because it's obvious, whenever you have that many millions of people, there's going to be people that fall into both of those camps. So the question is, I guess, so it's really an attrition and addition.
Which, by the way, we saw this phenomenon you're talking about in Georgia in the runoff elections.
Yep. So what you have is, okay, how many people are going to, and again, I always have to bring this up because every year more people who vote Democrat are pumped out of the education system. So you have to say, what's going to be the net gain of new voters and how are they going to vote if they vote? What's going to be the net loss of people who say, screw it, I showed up for Trump and that stuff, and I don't trust the system? What's going to be the net gain of people that didn't show up in 2020 in this election, which the numbers seem very few on that because voter turnout was huge on the right. People say, well, Biden got the most votes in history. Let's say all of these votes are correct. Trump got the second most votes in history. So how many people who didn't vote are going to show up to vote? And so that's going to be a gain. And then how many people double down and are like, yes, we're really going to do it, and remain, kind of in the game, I guess, and still have faith in the system? I think the odds of the group that either gets doubly motivated or new voters added, or who didn't show up in 2022, of that number being bigger than the people who only showed up because of Trump, or who have completely lost faith in the system and are done entirely, or die because old voters are more likely to vote Republican. I think on net balance, I don't see any way in which the first group is bigger than the second group of the people that don't show up for whatever reason. So yeah, and my fear is there will be a legitimate victory in 2022 on a legislative level. The Dems will keep will keep control in the House, in all of it. They'll keep
House
their
and Senate,
and that in 2024, no matter what happens, I think that there's a good chance that the Republicans lose legitimately in 2024, but the loss of this one, the midterms in 2022 and 2024, will make what happened on the 6th look like, the Macy's Day Parade. That's what I worry about, is that if we're still a country in 4 years, that the reaction to what will probably be a legitimate loss. Now, I'm assuming, baked into what I'm saying here, I'm assuming that the left doesn't get comfortable and do what they did in 2016. I'm making a lot of assumptions.
Yeah.
And so I acknowledge that. But I think that there's a good chance that the right loses again in 2024, and that's the breaking point for them. And that if it isn't already a movement based in resentment, that will be the thing that causes it to be a movement based in resentment. Plus all of the media. I mean, you can't leave out being labeled a terrorist and all of these things. And so the amount of good people, I think, that will be radicalized, or the amount of assholes who just are sitting on the bench that are radicalized during that time, I think is going to be huge. And the left is going to create the monster that they have been cosplaying against, and they're about to go from cosplaying to real deal in short order.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the biggest question about 2024 is who is Kamala going to be running with? And so, we'll see then when we get there. And I don't mean that in a gleeful. I don't know if he's going to make it. I don't want him to not make it, but yeah, it's going to be hard for him, I think. But I mean, it's far away with the election. I don't know. I mean, I'm imagining that the news cycle is going to slow down quite a bit over the next 4 years. They're going to play that to their advantage. So to see new things pop up, and we have to see where we're at with coronavirus. And my biggest fear, kind of, I guess, long term and short term, would be, the stimulus checks becoming it's just a form of UBI. And then that's going to be a huge weapon for them to yield, saying they're going to take away your right to get paid by the government every month.
Well, the one thing, let me add this, is I think what I just said might sound like those who are disillusioned on the right will, like, it'll be easy to equate disillusionment with inaction. And I think that if you look at just the personality types that are more likely to be on the right, I think people will just go, screw it, screw the government. And that's where you're going to get that migration to different areas, and they're just going to do their own thing. And you're going to see more and more of that, whether it's, communities cropping up around, shared vision of education for their kids, or not wanting their kids to, their daughters to have to run track against biological males, or who they don't have the same COVID restrictions. I think it's going to be huge for
that'll be a huge migration.
Play. To work at jobs that don't require them to have a vaccine, or to have some type of Vax ID, which I think is coming. And so just because they don't show up to vote doesn't mean they won't have done something. And so then what you'll have is you'll have a group that does, like, rebel, maybe physically. And that's where I say, I think we'll see really, probably violence from the right in 2024. But then what you'll have is that question of, I've said since the election, I think, but the left legislating a bunch of stuff on those communities, on those kind of ideological enclaves that form on the right. And, the right, those places largely saying no. And then what's the reaction going to be to no? No, we're not going to pay that tax. No, we're not going to do this thing. Yeah, but I mean, all of that, of course, is crazy speculation. And, I'm cool with saying that and giving any pushback. I would love to be wrong about all of it. But I look at probabilities and trends, and that's what I see. And, like, the particulars aren't as important as the overall idea of just an increasingly fractured America, which leads to more and more violence and tensions, as resentment becomes the driving force on either side of it. Scott Adams talks about, it's okay to be wrong if you're wrong in the right direction. And so I might, I'm sure I'm wrong about a lot of the things I just said, but I don't think as of right now, if you look at the trajectory, I think I'm wrong if I am in the right direction. That's where we're heading, to something like that. We're heading to some, breaking point with our current trajectory. What that looks like specifically, I don't know. Yeah. But anyone who says that they don't think resentment's going to be the driving motivation on the right going forward, if they don't change, if they don't figure it out soon. And this is where I think that podcasting and getting in and being a voice in the space is actually more important than ever, because that's where people on the right are getting, like, what's shaping their views is Ben Shapiro and the Michael Knowles and, Dave Rubins and Carlin and all of those things. And so, like, the more voices that are, like, not fomenting resentment, I think that's going to have more power than whatever political leaders rise up. And the inverse of that, or not inverse, but the other version of that is, I think that if an actual fascist, crazy person does rise up as a leader on the right, I think they'll come from the podcasting world, not the political world.
100%. Yeah.
Anyway.
That's a trade-off you have. You can, when you don't have as stringent of gatekeepers, there's going to be crazies will come in. But the idea, I would say, around the whole podcasting, which the podcasting is the one thing, again, I would say as a replacement for traditional education and traditional media. Honestly, I mean, it's the free speech line. Even if they're crazy as to come in the podcasting world, they can get their ideas out there, and it allows people like us to fight against those ideas openly too, without the fear of getting, shut out and canceled. So hopefully that keeps moving. I don't know the large social media trends we see today. I hope it still remains possible, because there's, a lot of radicals on the other side who aren't considered radicals by the appropriate amount of people. Especially, I don't know if you heard that one guy who's going, we didn't talk about it on this podcast, but I think we talked about it offline, that guy who's getting threatened with 10 years in prison for that one meme saying, text your vote here. Well, some people found out and found a blue check mark who did the exact same thing on the left, and nothing, not kicked off Twitter, not suspended, nothing. So there's certainly that asymmetry. And I think the more people see that, like I have some friends who are very far on the left, Bernie supporters, and they look at that and it's like, no, that's just wrong. Like, I don't care who you vote for. That's awful. So, I hope I can try to stay more optimistic. Unfortunately, I don't disagree with a lot of what you just said. The only little thing is, I don't think they're going to look at losing part of the white vote as a problem. I think they're going to see that as more of a one-off, or not a one-off, but as a result of a lot of people feeling, a lot of more uninformed people, or low information diet people just getting the information saying, if I vote for Trump, I'm a racist, so I'm not going to vote for him. So I think that pushed a lot of that vote toward that direction, and it's going to be up to the right's messaging saying, okay, don't believe in what these people say. They'll call anything a Nazi, if it's an obstacle for them to get across. So I think it's going to
go ahead and say that I think, and I know that there's a bad way to interpret what I say, but I don't care, that if they don't at least have it in their mind that they need to get those voters back, then they're dumb. Yeah. So, like, to say that they will need to appeal to the white males that they lost is factually true. Now, you can do that in a way that doesn't just appeal to those people. And I think the better strategy is to have an appeal like what they've done before, how they gained a lot of voters from different like racial classes that they haven't historically had. And what that appeal was a populist appeal. That's how they were able to make that appeal. And so I think what you're saying is right. That they like, what I wasn't saying is, I think that they will, have a multiple day conference on how we can appeal to white males. I don't think that's going to happen. I'm just saying it's part of the math now. That's all I'm saying, which is just, it's factually true. It's part of the math.
I think appealing to lost voters is a bit different than appealing to white people. I think it's a bit different, but I think we both agree on that point. But it's certainly, I think one way they can take it is like, we need to fix the issues wrong in the system, and hopefully that message gives more confidence to people who are like, the system's broken, why would I even leave my house to vote? So they're going to have to hit that hard, and obviously the left is going to say that's racist, because why not?
If the right came out with if they had a person who was able to clearly and actually had the microphone to speak to just to student loans, they would win a huge number of young voters by saying college, if like just them going out there and saying the university system screwed up, you're being screwed. You should be able to write this off. Like, here's a person who voted for this whenever they finalized it. You could never write this off in bankruptcy. His name is Joe Biden. When they voted for it, I believe they finalized it in 2004, 2006, something like that, is when that was that finally happened. What they did originally was they increased. It was, here's the amount of years you have to wait in order to do it and make payments on this before you can declare bankruptcy. And they kept lengthening that time. And it was in the early 2000s that they voted to say, okay, yeah, you can never do it. But if they just speaking to that, can you even think of a time that, like in a debate or anything, that a person on the right even addressed the student loan thing? I can't think of any time, not in this administration, not during the last primaries, whenever Trump was running, anything like that. Like it's crickets.
No, certainly not in debate. No, I think a couple of press conferences here and there, but it's always very shallow. Like, this is a problem, and then it ends there, right?
Yeah.
There's no
if they even say
solutions.
It's a problem.
The left can say a solution like, this is a problem, we'll pay for it. Like, that's their solution. So it's so easy, simple, and compact to the point.
Awful. Right. But at least what I put in this thing I've been writing is, if you have a person who is ignoring the problem or saying that's all your fault, personal responsibility, you're an idiot or something, or it's just silence, and another person who's like, yeah, this is a problem, and you're right to be pissed off, and here's what I'm going to do about it. Which one are you going to listen to? Like, you're going to be way more just relieved by the fact that someone's even talking about it and legitimizing your frustration than you are about the actual thing they're proposing. And that's why the left has gained so much ascendancy with these things, I think. And so, whatever the right does, there's a way, and I say this carefully, there's a way to channel resentment that is correct. And, I think that it is justified for people to be pissed off that the blueprint isn't right. I think I'm pissed. I don't blame, necessarily anything, because it's just, we just have these embedded narratives, man. It just is.
Well, I think a good example of that is the meme we talked about, I think not on this conversation, but of the Trump, like, they don't hate me because of me, they hate me because of you. That is like the perfect, because it's true.
Yep. Yeah. And so there's a way to channel that, to validate frustration and say, you should be pissed. You should be mad as hell. And actually, you should be mad at everyone on my side of the aisle that never talked about this, that did it before. So we screwed up by not addressing these issues. And you should be just as mad at the other side for giving you bogus solutions that aren't actually going to help you. Like, maybe a little bit less mad, because at least they're validating your feelings. But, at the end of the day, if their answer isn't an answer, that should piss you off too. So be mad at all of us. At least we're trying to address it now. But I'm here to say, this is a problem. Here's what I would like to do to fix it. Here's why their answer sucks. And that's a populist thing that taps into legitimate issues and lays out also a logical endpoint to them as well via solution. It's not, we're just going to give you money. There is no logical endpoint to the left's things. It's just, give us more power, give us more of your liberties, and we'll give you that temporary safety. So yeah, do I think that's going to happen? Probably not. Should it? Yeah.
I mean, I think the right has had a lot of the right ideas. I think what they need to learn from Trump, and this is what concerns me in the next year, and this is why I brought up the infighting thing. It's like, are you going to become the party of Trump? Are you going to reject him completely? Or are you going to learn the good things he did that are valuable to the party, which is exactly what you should do. And there's so many people, I always talk about the Lincoln Project conservative types that are just full on rejection to the point where they love Biden. It's like, oh, look at this great guy. It's like, no, you're not learning any of the lessons you should have learned.
Yep.
Even if you thought the last 4 years was a disaster. Like, even in a disaster, you can learn what to change. And the ability to push back and not just always play nice. And, if the pressure's high enough, to just submit, like, that's something you need to take into the next several election cycles. You have to be able to fight back and propose solutions. Because I'll admit, Trump he didn't always propose solutions, but he certainly told you the problem, and he wasn't afraid to do it. I mean, the no filter thing, it's a win some, lose some kind of strategy, but at least he said what was on his mind. He said a lot of true things.
Yeah. And the virus came from China. They lied. They let this thing out. That's a true statement, and he got crapped all over for it, but he's not wrong.
Yeah.
Say, no, this came from China, and it's not about Chinese Americans, leave them alone, but the Chinese government is absolutely culpable in this. So no, you're totally right. And talking about trade deals like the speech he gave at Mount Rushmore was fantastic, talking about American ideals and the people who want to reject that and change it. But they'll learn the wrong lessons. All of it. I think everyone in charge is going to learn the wrong lessons, unfortunately. But anyway, yeah, man, I mean, I don't know if there's anywhere else to go from where we're talking about. We can wrap it up, here. If you have any other thoughts or anything, I don't know what else to say about this other than, damn it, we got to do something. I fear anything else I say would be redundant at this point, unless you want to talk about the Capitol riots, which I think we should talk about at another time. But
yeah, I would say that for another time. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the points we hit on are extremely important to the near future of the pushback. Again, I always hate saying the right, because there's so many people who don't identify as the right, but basically you said it, any non-left people basically is the people who should get together. And like I've mentioned several times, even if you're of the left, like you should want a healthy right to make sure they expose the bad ideas, and the right needs to do the same thing to the left and want a healthier party. I think I mentioned that in one of the big Zoom calls, and I got a lot of pushback just because they're like, I don't think that'll happen. It's like, well, I'm not saying do you think it'll happen. I'm saying, should it happen? Do you want it to happen? This is what you want, right? Exactly. And I'm the one saying, like, if that doesn't happen, the republic's over. It's gone. You can't just have a single ideology system in a country this big. And it's what's made us unique, is having all those different ideas and cultures mixed together. And that's why we're so successful. And I think what the right has kind of done is kind of reject some of the cultural aspects. I'm not a multiculturalism guy, but I do like the subcultures within the United States that make us so unique. And I think they're extremely important. And I'm also not, of the left, where it's like we praise culture unless it's something we don't like. And then you can't do it, and we're going to use it as a weapon. So there's got to be middle ground we got to find. And I think it's very important. But the right needs to get their stuff together and learn how to push back. And really the stuff we kind of began the conversation with, the populism stuff, it's like, okay, it could be a difference in definitions. I think you and I completely agree on what we ought to do, which is the important thing. And I know a very conservative thing to do is argue about things that don't actually matter. I know Carlin kind of exposed this in a conversation, and I agree. We do often get in a conversation. I actually was in a Facebook fight because someone posted that small clip of Biden saying we got to vaccinate, or we're going to vaccinate 300 people instead of 300 million, where the post was originally because he was like bumbling around and couldn't speak a coherent sentence. But everyone's like, oh, you're just making fun of him because he got the number wrong. And then someone's like, well, it's a math error. It's kind of funny. And then I got in a big argument, like a very, very long argument with someone saying, well, it's not a math error. It's just he misspoke. And I'm like, well, technically it's a math error. He's off by several scale factors. It's like, and I got in a conversation just about math errors and the definition of math errors.
You gotta get off Facebook,
it was a stupid conversation. I admit it. I like it just because I'm a math guy. So it's kind of interesting to bounce it around, but that is a type of stupid conversation I shouldn't be in. And conservatives, I think, get pulled into a lot. And we need to learn how to stay focused on, the important things. And I think that'll help, if there's something you call a new right, which I know is a scary term for a lot because you don't know what's going to come out. Is it going to be a phoenix, or is it going to be, a crow that's on fire? You never really know, what's going to come out of a new movement, but I think it's definitely needed. And
people need to understand the inevitability that something will rise up. And so the question isn't will something, the question is what. And so once you accept the inevitability of something, then it's the onus is on all interested parties to shape it in the most productive way. So yeah, I think you're right. Like, yeah, people are scared of that, but it's like, okay, well, something's going to happen. So there's no world where there isn't a new thing that happens on the right. So very soon, in short order, the question is, like you said, is it a monster, or is it, something, a non-monster, a productive thing?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why I'm so, I think, adamant right now about addressing these issues and having some, again, at this point, I don't care if it's left or right, as long as they're honestly addressing these issues, because they're not going anywhere. These are the main things that are dividing us and are sowing all this frustration and hatred that bad actors are tapping into. And so, like, but it's also another way of thinking about it is that this is a thing that good actors could tap into. Those who are acting with the best interest of people in mind could tap into if they were willing to do so. And so it's just who's going to capitalize first. And I worry it's going to be pathological and malevolent in nature, but it doesn't have to be. So anyway, Absolutely. All right, man. What's your final word? Give your final thoughts and let's close her out. What do you think?
All populism is evil, right?
Okay.
Didn't we agree on that? No.
I think so, yeah.
Again, going into the stupid arguments that we don't need to get into, I just always warn people when you gravitate, especially towards a person, the reason that I have, much like, Lincoln Project Conservatives has such an opposition to wanting to make a Trump party is because I don't want to make an idol of someone. I think Trump was an overall good for the right, but he's a flawed person, a very, very flawed person. Who
also known as a person.
Right, exactly. Who I think which I think everyone needs to admit, and I think a lot of people actually do. He dug his own grave a little bit with this last election cycle, so you can't put all the blame on the left, manipulating the election and stuff like that. You got to own up to your own mistakes you made. So I think that's super important when it comes to moving forward. And yeah, it's the question we end on every podcast is like, what do we do to fix it? And obviously that's the hard question to answer. And I think we try to roundabout give a bit of the same response by, podcasting like this is a good answer toward it. So even if it reaches 30 people, those 30 people hopefully can be like, okay, I need to think more independently, because my objective here is not to make you a conservative. It's to make you an independent thinker. And I have a firm belief that an independent thinker is going to be able to look at what the extreme left is doing right now and justify that as wrong, as opposed to just following it. And like I said, even if they build their own new left that ends up being a healthy, good, returns to liberalism left, that's awesome to me. If they end up going to the right, becoming more conservative and rebuilding the new right, awesome, me too. But the whole point is we need to build a healthier politic, a healthier society, a healthy culture in order to fight back against these things. Or, even if there's a temporary win in the future, it's going to be temporary if we can't make a permanent change.
Yep. Yeah, no, I think that's dead on. It's very well said. The only thing I would add is there are an overwhelming majority of people right now. I don't know if it's a majority, but there's a lot of people who are kind of looking around for someone to, I guess, speak to what they're feeling, mm-hmm. speak to what they're thinking, speak to their concerns. They're looking for guidance. They're looking for comfort. They're looking for answers to their frustration, to their fears, whatever. And there are another large group of people who are vying for the attention and to be that person speaking into that. And so, my encouragement to anyone who watches this is to, be very discerning with who is, shaping your thoughts and your perspectives and your, just your paradigms about what's happening right now. And be very wary of anyone that seems to be interested in trying to get you to hate. Be very wary of anyone who is only engaged in those petty fights, like what you're talking about, whether it's right or left, I don't care. And try to really fight to listen to people who might not be telling you what you want to hear, but it seems like they're being honest with you. I think those voices are few and the noise is a lot. And so, be wary of anyone who seems like they're trying to tell you what you want to hear, especially if it's something that foments resentment as opposed to addressing issues, but also in a solutions-based way. Anyway, yeah. So I hope we are people like that. I think we are. But I'm not saying just us, just anyone, and I have no one in mind on either side of that necessarily. But that's the lens I'm using. That's one reason why actually I'm not listening to Sam Harris right now, just for example. So actually that just popped into my mind.
That's the first time I've listened to him today. It was the first time in since like April of last year.
For that reason, for example, because of just everything is just dripping with, these moral binaries that are so over the top and not grounded in reality that it taints anything that he has to say, and it's unfortunate. So anyone that seems like that's their driving thing is resentment or hatred or just emotion is someone I'm avoiding. Anyway,
is it fair to say you're on team Ben Affleck now? You understand the reference I'm going with?
I got it.
Deep cut.
Yeah, deep cut. Yeah. No, you can like or dislike two people who are being assholes. I think you can hold both those thoughts in your head. So, like if I watched, I could watch a football game where I don't like either of the teams and want both of them to lose if that was possible. Anyway, yeah, all that to say, I think that's a good place to end it. It was long, but I think it was, that was a good conversation. I'm probably going to try to make a clip or two out of it to try to get people to watch it if I can. Anyway, so Kevin, you are at engineeringpolitics.locals.com, or is it ENG Politics?
No, so the full one's engineeringpolitics.locals.com. My handle is at ENG_politics, I believe, on locals and more generally. And that's really the cool part about locals is like you join, if you're listening to this on engineering politics, go to returntoreason.locals.com to join his. And I hope you consider doing vice versa. But yeah, locals is a great place. And also, as we're on the locals topic, make sure to check out the latest conversation with Truman and Carlin, which is really, really good. I tried to stay on it live as long as I could. I took my daughter into school late because I was listening to you guys. I was so into it. So you're
I'm gonna pick your brain about that. I enjoyed that. That was really good for me, to be honest.
Yeah.
After I got off the conversation with her, I was like, I don't know if I could give a clear answer as to what that conversation was about, but I felt like the through lines, the topics we hit was necessary, at least just for me personally, in terms of reorienting myself right now. So I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope others did as well. But anyway, yeah. So locals, YouTube, Engineering Politics, Twitter, ENG_politics. He has his own website, engineeringpolitics.com.
So I'm about to drop the website just because locals is better, but I'll be redirecting people from the website. But
and on ThinkSpot as well, Engineering Politics. And then, did I miss anything? I don't think I did, right?
I don't know if Parler's still a thing. I haven't checked my account in a while since that all went down, but if it's still there, you can check me out on Parler if it still exists. I'm also on Tinder, swipe right. But yeah, make sure to check out Truman at, like I said before, returntoreason.locals.com, at My Mundane Mind on Twitter. Check out Medium. So I'll actually be publishing my articles from the website, probably on Medium, because I know it's a good resource to find people. I know you write a lot of good stuff on there, so certainly go check them out. And you said you're working on a new written piece coming out soon, hopefully.
We'll see, man. This one, I have to get in the right headspace to write it. If I try to sit down and I'm not there, it's just blah. But if I have it, I can sit down and write several pages. I'm working on a forward to it right now, but we'll see. I'm going to release that in tandem with audio essays because there's no rational person will read it in its entirety as it is. So,
well, if you can read it, I strongly recommend the read because you can definitely tell the headspace you're in when you're writing some stuff, and it makes it a really cool reading experience. And then obviously the audio version of it's great too. So recommend it.
So, all right, everyone, I'm going to stop recording. Thank you for watching. And I guess until next time, peace.
See ya. All right, there it is. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. Make sure to join the Return to Reason Locals community and show Truman some support. You can go to returntoreason.locals.com to support his locals community, and you can also find him on ThinkSpot and YouTube by searching Return to Reason. You can find him on Twitter at MyMundaneMind, and you can also find his written content on medium.com. And as I said at the beginning of the show, I want to take a quick moment to share different ways you can help support this content. There are a few easy ways to do this. You can follow me on Twitter at ENG_politics, if it still exists, or if it ever comes back. You can also give me a follow on Parler at Engineering Politics. You can join the Facebook group named Engineering Politics, where I share and discuss content with the Facebook community. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel under the name Engineering Politics, where you can find the video version of each podcast. I'm also active on ThinkSpot, which is a discourse-generating application that promotes intelligent and honest conversations while discouraging the trolling and nonsense found on most social media platforms. You can find all of my podcasts and videos on there as well, and now there's a new donation feature on my ThinkSpot page for those of you who follow me on there and want to support this content. But the best way to interact with me, get my newest content, and support this podcast is the Engineering Politics Locals community. This is an amazing community that goes far beyond just a membership platform intermediary for creators. It allows the followers of this content to get together and discuss the newest articles, podcasts, and videos all in one place. And while we're here, I want to announce a quick change. I'll be using this Locals community as my new website, since I'll be shutting down my old website. Locals just makes a ton more sense as a main resource to find my content, and I'll be republishing my written content on medium.com, but I'll keep you posted. So I strongly urge you to join the Engineering Politics Locals community at engineeringpolitics.locals.com. You can become a member for free, and now you can get a 3-month free trial when becoming a subscriber if you use promo code EPFREE. That's spelled EPFREE, no spaces. I would love to have your support with your subscription so this content can remain independent and keep growing. Monthly subscriptions to the Engineering Politics Locals community start as low as $2 per month. I hope I can count on your support so I can continue to make high-quality podcasts and subscriber content. I appreciate your consideration. Let's build a community together. Thanks for listening. This is the Engineering Politics Podcast. None of the persons, podcasts, books, or other references other than engineering politics used in this work directly reflect my ideas and/or personal beliefs, nor should they be held accountable for anything said during this podcast. Thank you for listening.